The city of Calcutta, which boasts of 1 million people, must have at least 2 million pigeons. Every third Hindu boy has perhaps a dozen pet carriers, tumblers, fantails, and pouters. The art of domesticating pigeons goes back thousands of years in India, and she has contributed 2 species of pigeons as a special product of her bird fanciers, the fantail and the pouter. Love and care have been showered on pigeons for centuries by emperors, princes, and queens in their marble palaces, as well as by the poor in their humble homes. The gardens, grottos, and fountains of the Indian rich, the small field of flowers and fruits of the common folks, each has its ornament and music, many-colored pigeons and cooing white doves with ruby eyes. Even now, any winter morning foreigners who visit our big cities may see on the flat-roofed houses innumerable boys waving white flags as signals to their pet pigeons flying up in the crisp cold air. Through the blue heavens, flocks of the birds soar like vast clouds. They start in small flocks and spend about 20 minutes circling over the roofs of their owners' homes. Then they slowly ascend, and all the separate groups from different houses of the town merge into one big flock and float far out of sight. How they ever return to their own homes is a wonder, for all the housetops look alike in shape in spite of their rose, yellow, violet, and white colors. But pigeons have an amazing sense of direction and love of their owners. I have yet to see creatures more loyal than pigeons and elephants. I have played with both, and the tusker on 4 feet in the country, or the bird on 2 wings in the city, no matter how far they wandered, were by their almost infallible instinct brought back to their friend and brother, man. My elephant friend was called Kari, of whom you have heard before, and the other pet that I knew well was a pigeon. His name was Chitragriva, Chitra meaning painted in gay colors, and Griva, neck. In one phrase, pigeon, gay, neck. Sometimes he was called iridescence, throated. Of course, Gay Neck did not come out of his egg with an iridescent throat. He had to grow the feathers week by week, and until he was 3 months old, there was very little hope that he would acquire the brilliant color. But at last, when he did achieve it, he was the most beautiful pigeon in my town in India, and the boys of my town owned 40,000 pigeons. But I must begin this story at the very beginning, I mean with Gay Neck's parents. His father was a tumbler who married the most beautiful pigeon of his day. She came from a noble old stock of carriers. That is why Gay Neck proved himself later such a worthy carrier pigeon in war as well as in peace. From his mother he inherited wisdom, from his father bravery and alertness. He was so quick-witted that sometimes he escaped the clutches of a hawk by tumbling at the last moment right over the enemy's head. But of that later, in its proper time and place. Now let me tell you what a narrow escape Gay Neck had while still in the egg. I shall never forget the day when, through a mistake of mine, I broke one of the 2 eggs that his mother had laid. It was very stupid of me. I regret it even now. Who knows, maybe with that broken egg perished the finest pigeon of the world. It happened in this way. Our house was 4 stories high, and on its roof was built our pigeon house. A few days after the eggs were laid, I decided to clean the pigeonhole in which Gay Neck's mother was sitting on them. I lifted her gently and put her on the roof beside me. Then I lifted each egg carefully and put it most softly in the next pigeonhole, which, however, had no cotton nor flannel on its hard wooden floor. Then I busied myself with the task of removing the debris from the birth nest. As soon as that was done, I brought 1 egg back and restored it to its proper place. Next, I reached for the second one and laid a gentle but firm hand on it. Just then, something fell upon my face like a roof blown by the storm. It was Gay Neck's father, furiously beating my face with his wings. Worse still, he had placed the claws of one of his feet on my nose. The pain and surprise of it was so great that ere I knew how, I had dropped the egg. I was engrossed in beating off the bird from my head and face, and at last he flew away. But too late. The little egg lay broken in a mess at my feet. I was furious with its clumsy father, and also with myself. Why with myself? Because I should have been prepared for the father bird's attack. He took me for a stealer of his eggs, and in his ignorance was risking his life to prevent my robbing his nest. May I impress it upon you that you should anticipate all kinds of surprise attacks when cleaning a bird's home during nesting season. But to go on with our story. The mother bird knew the day when she was to break open the eggshell with her own beak in order to usher Gay Neck into the world, though the male sits on the egg pretty nearly 1/3 of the time, for he does that each day from morning till late afternoon, yet he does not know when the hour of his child's birth is at hand. No one save the mother bird arrives at that divine certainty. We do not yet understand the nature of the unique wireless message by which she learns that within the shell, the yolk and the white of her egg have turned into a baby bird. She also knows how to tap the right spot so that the shell will break open without injuring her child in the slightest. To me, that is as good as a miracle. Gay Neck's birth happened exactly as I have described. About the 20th day after the laying of the egg, I noticed that the mother was not sitting on it anymore. She pecked the father and drove him away every time he flew down from the roof of the house and volunteered to sit on the egg. Then he cooed, which meant, "Why do you send me away?" She, the mother, just pecked him the more, meaning, "Please go. The business on hand is very serious." At that, the father flew away. That worried me, for I was anxious for the egg to hatch, and was feeling suspicious about its doing it at all. With increased interest and anxiety, I watched the pigeonhole. An hour passed. Nothing happened. It was about the 3rd quarter of the next hour that the mother turned her head one way and listened to something, probably a stirring inside that egg. Then she gave a slight start. I felt as if a tremor were running through her whole body. With it a great resolution came into her. Now she raised her head and took aim. In 2 strokes she cracked the egg open, revealing a wee bird all beak and a tiny shivering body. Now watch the mother. She is surprised. Was it this that she was expecting all these long days? Oh, how small, how helpless. The moment she realizes her child's helplessness, she covers him up with the soft blue feathers of her breast. Chapter 1. Gay. Next training for war. After we returned to town, the air was filled with the rumors of a coming war somewhere in Europe. Now that winter was at hand, I decided to give Gay Neck such training as would be necessary in case he was asked to be a carrier for the British War Department. Since he was used to the climate of the northeastern Himalayas, he would be an invaluable messenger for the army in any European country. Even now, with the aid of wireless telegraph and radio, no army can dispense with the help of carrier pigeons. All that will become clear to you as the present story unfolds itself. In training carriers for war work, I followed a plan of my own, which Gond approved. By the way, the old fellow came all the way to town with us. He stayed in our house 2 or 3 days, then decided to leave, saying, "The city is unbearable. I never loved any city, but this one frightens me with its electric tramway and how a gari, wind chariot, the automobile. If I do not shake the dust of this town off my feet very soon, I shall be nothing better than a coward. A tiger in the jungle does not frighten me, but I cannot say the same of an automobile. One crossing of a modern city street imperils more lives in a minute than a day in the most dangerous forests. Farewell! I go where the woods wear stillness for a dress, the air is free of odors and dust, and the sky, a hollowed turquoise, is not cross-cut and pierced with poles and telegraph wires. Instead of factory whistles, I shall hear the song of birds, and in the place of thieves and gunmen, I shall have innocent tigers and panthers face to face. Farewell. but before he left, he helped me to buy about 40 more carriers and some tumblers. You may ask me the reason of my preference for these two kinds. I do not know that I have any exclusive love for tumblers and carriers, but it is true that fantails, pouters, and other pigeons are more ornamental than useful. In our house we had some of these varieties, but they proved so difficult to keep in company with the carriers and travelers that I finally bestowed all my appreciation on pure flyers. In India we have a queer custom that I do not like. If you sell a carrier no matter at what fabulous price, and it flies away from its new owner and comes back to you, it becomes your property again, and no matter what the value, you never refund the price. Knowing that to be the accepted custom among pigeon fanciers, I had to train my newly acquired pets before anything else to love me. Since I had paid for them, I did not wish them to return to their former owners. I did my very best to make them cherish their new home loyally. But life is practical. I had to begin with the most necessary steps. The first few weeks I had to tie up their wings in order to keep them completely within the bounds of our roof. The art of tying a pigeon's feathers so that he is prevented from flying is delicate. You take a thread and pass one end of it over one feather and under the next, very near its root, all the way until the entire wing is encompassed. Then you pass the other end of the thread by the same process under the first, over the second, and so on to the end of the wing, where the two ends of the thread are tied. It is very much like darning. It is an utterly painless form of captivity, for though it prevents a pigeon from flying, yet he is not kept from opening or flapping his wings. He can stretch them and can massage them with his beak. After this, I used to put my new pigeons at different corners of the roof so that they might sit still and with their eyes take in the color and quality of their new surroundings. At least 15 days should be allowed for this process. Here I must record a cunning thing that Gay-neck did when his wings were tied in the above manner. I sold him early in November just to see if he would return to me when his wings were freed from their chain of threads. Well, 2 days after purchasing Gay-neck, his new owner came to me and said, "Gay-neck has run away." "How?" I asked. "I don't know, but I cannot find him in my house." "Did you tie his wings?" "Could he fly?" I asked. "His wings were tied," he answered. That struck terror to my soul. I said, "Oh, you brother of a camel and cousin of an ass, instead of running hither, you should have sought for him in your own neighborhood. Do you not see that he tried to fly, but since his wings were tied, he fell off your roof, and by now he has been killed and devoured by some cat? Oh, this is a slaughter of a pigeon. You have robbed mankind of its diadem of carriers. You have murdered the glory of pigeonhood." Thus I reproached him. My words frightened the man so thoroughly that he begged me to come with him and hunt for Gay-neck. My first thought was to rescue the poor fellow from cats. We spent a whole afternoon, but in vain. I examined more sordid alleyways in 12 hours, expecting to find him at bay before some mangy cat than I have done in all the rest of my life. Alas, he was not to be found. That night I came home late, for which I got a good scolding and went to bed a broken-hearted boy. My mother, who understood my state of mind, did not wish me to enter the world of sleep with hurt and excited feelings. She spoke, "Your pigeon is safe. Go to sleep in a calm mood." "Why, mother?" she answered. "If you are calm, your tranquil thoughts can help you. If you are peaceful, your serenity will make him serene. And if he is serene, his mind will work well. And you know, my beloved, how keen Gay-neck's mind is. If he sets to work with tranquillity, he will overcome all obstacles and reach home and safety. Now let us make a prayer to infinite compassion and calm ourselves." So we sat surrounded by the silence of night for half an hour, saying, "I am serene. All that exists is serene." Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. As I was going to sleep, my mother said, "You will now dream no bad dreams. Now that God's peace and compassion are kindled in you, you will have a night of fruitful rest." Peace. That it proved to be fruitful there is no doubt, for about 11 in the morning Gaynek flew up across the sky. He rode high. How he freed his wings I shall have to tell you in his own language. Let us again use the grammar of fancy and the dictionary of imagination. "O master of many tongues," began Gaynek on our own roof, "I could abide not more than a day in that man's house. He gave me insect-infected grain to eat, and made me drink water that was not fresh. After all, I am a soul. Why should I be treated as a stone or shard? Moreover, he tied my wings with evil-smelling fishing tackle. Would I stay with such an one? Never. So hardly had he put me on the white roof of his house and gone downstairs, than I flapped my wings and flew. Alas, my wings were heavy, and it hurt me to fly. So I fell on the awning of a shop in the lane nearby. There I sat waiting and watching for help. I saw some swifts go by. I called to them, but they were not my friends. I saw a wild pigeon. I called, but he too made no response. Just then I beheld a dark cat coming towards me. Here was death on 4 feet. As it drew nearer and nearer, its topaz eyes burnt with red. It crouched and made ready to spring. I, too, sprang, clear over his head onto the cornice about 5 feet above the awning, where a swift had made his home. Though it was most difficult, I clung to that spot until the black one vanished. Now I leaped again. 4 or 5 feet above me was the roof. There I perched, but my wing hurt. In order to ease my pain, I massaged the roots of my feathers. One by one my beak pressed and rubbed them, and then something slipped. One small feather I had succeeded in pressing out of the grip of the fishing tackle, which stank exceedingly. I kept on rubbing and pressing the next feather, and behold, it too was free. Oh, what a glorious feeling! Soon the entire wing was free. Just then the black cat reappeared on the roof, but now I was able to fly about 10 feet, and I reached the cornice of a high building, where I found a convenient perch. Thence I watched the deadly cat. He crouched and sprang upon the fishing tackle just shed from my wing. That told me a new story. It was the stench of the fishing tackle that had attracted him, and not me. Forthwith I began to bite and press the cord that bound my other wing. By the time I had freed half the feathers, night came on, and when I had thrown my last evil-smelling chain away from my wing, I was forced to await the dawn to fly home. For owls fly in the early twilight, and hawks come later, and I wished to have a safe path through the air. Now I am at home. I am hungry and thirsty. The first thing I did with my new pigeons was to give them food and fresh water. I never let them drink the water they bathed in. Since Gaynek's wings smelled of fish, I gave him separate quarters from the other pigeons. It took 3 days longer and 3 good baths before Gaynek was fit for decent society. In passing, let me remark that my father made me return the money to the man who had bought Gaynek with such deplorable results. To tell you the truth, I did not wish to then. But now I feel I did right in obeying my parent. After a fortnight, and before unbinding the wings of my newly acquired pigeons, I bribed them to love me. Every morning I would put some millet seed and peanuts in ghee, clarified butter. After they had been soaked in butter all day, I gave a dozen each to every one of my pets. They were so fond of those delicacies that in 2 days' time they had formed the habit of coming to me before 5 in the afternoon, begging for buttered seeds. In 3 more days I freed their wings, in a subtle way, undoing them about 15 minutes before 5. They all flew off the moment they felt their liberty. But lo, after the first exhilaration of finding their freedom had passed, They flew down to the roof again for their meal of buttered peanuts and millet seeds. It is a pity that we have to win our pigeons' confidence by feeding their stomachs, but alas, I have noticed that there are many men and women who resemble pigeons in this respect. Chapter 2. Education of Gay Neck. There are two sweet sights in the bird world. One when the mother breaks open her egg in order to bring to light her child, and the other when she broods and feeds him. Gay Neck was brooded most affectionately by both his parents. This brooding did for him what cuddling does for human children. It gives the helpless ones warmth and happiness. It is as necessary to them as food. This is the time when a pigeonhole should not be stuffed with too much cotton or flannel, which should be put there more and more sparingly so that the temperature of the nest does not get too hot. Ignorant pigeon fanciers do not realize that as the baby grows larger, he puts forth more and more heat from his own body. And I think it is wise not to clean the nest frequently during this time. Everything that the parents allow to remain in the nest contributes to making their baby comfortable and happy. I remember distinctly how, from the second day of his birth, little Gay Neck automatically opened his beak and expanded his carnation-colored body like a bellows every time one of his parents flew back to their nest. The father or the mother put their beaks into his wide-open maw and poured into it the milk made in their own organs from millet seeds that they had eaten. I noticed this. The food that was poured into his mouth was very soft. No pigeon ever gives any seeds to its baby, even when it is nearly a month old, without first keeping them in its throat for some time, which softens the food before it enters the delicate stomach of the baby. Our Gay Neck was a tremendous eater. He kept one of his parents busy getting food while the other brooded or stayed with him. I think the father bird brooded and worked for him no less hard than the mother. No wonder his body grew very fat. His carnation color changed into a yellowish white, the first sign of feathers coming on. Then that gave way to prickly white feathers, round and somewhat stiff like a porcupine needle. The yellow things that hung about his mouth and eyes fell away. Slowly the beak emerged, firm, sharp, and long. What a powerful jaw! When he was about 3 weeks old, an ant was crawling past him into the pigeonhole at whose entrance he was sitting. Without any instruction from anybody, he struck it with his beak. Where there had been a whole ant now lay its 2 halves. He brought his nose down to the dead ant and examined what he had done. There was no doubt that he had taken that black ant for a seed and killed an innocent passer-by who was friendly to his race. Let us hope he was ashamed of it. Anyway, he never killed another ant the rest of his life. By the time he was 5 weeks old, he could hop out of his birth nest and take a drink from the pan of water left near the pigeonholes. Even now he had to be fed by his parents, though every day he tried to get food on his own account. He would sit on my wrist and dig up a seed at a time from the palm of my hand. He juggled it 2 or 3 times in his throat like a juggler throwing up balls in the air, and swallowed it. Every time Gay Neck did that, he turned his head and looked into my eyes as much as to say, "Am I not doing it well? You must tell my parents how clever I am when they come down from sunning themselves on the roof." All the same, he was the slowest of my pigeons in developing his powers. Just at this time I made a discovery. I never knew before how pigeons could fly in a dust storm without going blind. But as I watched the ever-growing Gay Neck, I noticed one day that a film was drawn over his eyes. I thought he was losing his sight. In my consternation, I put forth my hand to draw him nearer to my face in order to examine him closely. No sooner had I made the gesture than he opened his golden eyes and receded into the rear of the hole. But just the same, I caught and took him up on the roof, and in the burning sunlight of May I scrutinized his eyelids. Yes, there it was he had, attached to his eyelid, another thin lid delicate as tissue paper, and every time I put his face toward the sun he drew that film over the 2 orbits of gold. And so I learned that it was a protective film for the eye which enabled the bird to fly in a dust storm or straight toward the sun. In another fortnight, Gaynek was taught how to fly. It was not at all easy, bird though he was by birth. A human child may love the water, yet he has to make mistakes and swallow water while learning the art of swimming. Similarly with my pigeon. He had a mild distrust of opening his wings, and for hours he sat on our roof where the winds of the sky blew without quickening him to flight. In order to make the situation clear, let me describe our roof to you. It was railed with a solid concrete wall as high as a boy of 14. That prevented even a sleepwalker from slipping off the height of 4 stories on the summer nights when most of us slept on the roof. Gaynek. I put on that concrete wall every day. There he sat for hours at a time facing the wind, but that was all. One day I put some peanuts on the roof and called him to hop down and get them. He looked at me with an inquiring eye for a few moments. Turning from me, he looked down again at the peanuts. He repeated this process several times. When at last he was convinced that I was not going to bring these delicious morsels up for him to eat, he began to walk up and down the railing, craning his neck occasionally towards the peanuts about 3 feet below. At last, after 15 minutes of heart-breaking hesitancy, he hopped down. Just as his feet struck the floor, his wings, hitherto unopened, suddenly spread themselves out full sail as he balanced himself over the nuts. What a triumph! About this time I noticed the change of colors on his feathers. Instead of a nondescript gray-blue, a glossy aquamarine glowed all over him. And suddenly one morning in the sunlight his throat glistened like iridescent beads. Now came the supreme question of flight. I waited for his parents to teach him the first lessons, though I helped the only way I could. Every day for a few minutes I made him perch on my wrist. Then I would swing my arm up and down many times, and in order to balance himself on such a difficult perch he had to shut and open his wings frequently. That was good for him, but there ended my part of the teaching. You may ask me the reason of my hurrying matters so. He was already behind in his flying lessons, and in June the rains begin to fall in India, and with the approach of the rainy season any long flight becomes impossible. I wished to train him in learning his directions as soon as I could. However, one day, long before the end of May, his father undertook the task. This particular day, a brisk north wind that had been sweeping about and cooling the atmosphere of the city had just died down. The sky was clear as a limpid sapphire. The spaces were so clear that you could see the housetops of our town, then the fields and arbors of the country in the farthest distance. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Gaynek was sunning himself on the concrete wall of the roof. His father, who had been flying about in the air, came down and perched next to him. He looked at his son with a queer glance, as much as to say, "Here, lazy bones, you are nearly 3 months old, yet you do not dare to fly. Are you a pigeon or an earthworm?" But Gaynek, the soul of dignity, made no answer. That exasperated his father, who began to coo and boom at him in pigeon language. In order to get away from that volubility, Gaynek moved, but his father followed, cooing, booming, and banging his wings. Gaynek went on removing himself farther and farther, and the old fellow, instead of relenting, redoubled his talk and pursued. At last the father pushed him so close to the edge that Gaynek had only one alternative, that is, to slip off the roof. Suddenly his father thrust upon his young body all the weight of his old frame. Gaynek slipped. Hardly had he fallen half a foot when he opened his wings and flew. Oh, what an exhilarating moment for all concerned. His mother, who was downstairs dipping herself in the water and performing her afternoon toilet, came up through the staircase and flew to keep her son company. They circled above the roof for at least 10 minutes before they came down to perch. When they reached the roof, the mother folded her wings as a matter of course and sat still. Not so the son. He was in a panic, like a boy walking into cold and deep water. His whole body shook, and his feet trod the roof gingerly as he alighted, skating over it furiously and flapping his wings in order to balance himself. At last he stopped, as his chest struck the side of the wall, and he folded his wings as swiftly as we shut a fan. Gaynek was panting with excitement, while his mother rubbed him and placed her chest against him as if he were a mere baby who badly needed brooding. Seeing that his task had been done successfully, Gaynek's father went down to take his bath. All the other flocks that they had played with in the morning had gone home. Seeing them dip down so fast, a baz fell in front of them like a stone dropping from a Himalayan cliff. Just when he had descended to the level of my birds, he opened his wings and faced them. This was no new tactic, for it has been used in the past by every baz in order to strike terror into a flock of pigeons. That it succeeds in 10 cases out of 11 is undeniable, for when it happens, the terror-struck pigeons lose their sense of solidarity and fly pell-mell in every direction. No doubt that was what the baz hoped for now, but our wily Gaynek, beating his wings, flew without a tremor under the enemy about 5 feet, drawing the whole flock after him. He did it, knowing that the enemy never pounces upon a solidly unified group. But hardly had he gone 100 yards forward when the second, probably Mrs. Baz, fell in front of the pigeons and opened her wings as her husband had done. But Gaynek paid no attention. He led the whole flock straight toward her. It was inconceivable. No pigeon had dared do that before, and she fled from their attack. Hardly had her back been turned when Gaynek and the rest of the pigeons dipped and swooped as fast as they could go. By now they were hardly 600 feet from our roof, and then, as fate would have it, Mr. Baz, like a shell full of high explosives, fell again, this time right in the middle of the crescent, and opened his wings and beak like forks of fire, crying and shrieking with fury. That produced its effect. Instead of one solid wall of pigeons, the flock was cut in 2, of which one half followed Gaynek, while the other, smitten with abject fear, flew none knew whither. Gaynek did what a true leader does in great crises. He followed that panic-stricken flock until his section overtook it, and in no time, lo, they had merged into a single group once more. Hardly had that taken place when Mrs. Baz in her turn descended like a thunderbolt between him and the other pigeons. She almost fell on his tail and cut him off from the rest, who now, deprived of their mentor, sought safety in flight, paying no heed to anything. That isolated Gaynek completely and exposed him to attacks from every side. Still undaunted, he tried to fly down to his retreating followers. Ere he had descended a dozen feet, down before him swooped Mr. Baz. Now that Gaynek saw the enemy so near, he grew more audacious and tumbled. It was a fortunate action. Had he not done so, Mrs. Baz, who had shot out her talons from behind, would have captured him then and there. In the meantime, the rest of my pigeons were beating on and had almost reached home. They were falling on the roof as ripe fruits fall from a tree. But one among them was not a coward. On the contrary, he was of the very essence of bravery. It was Johore, the black diamond. As the whole crowd settled down on our roof, he tumbled and flew higher. There was no mistake about his intentions. He was going to stand by Gaynek. Seeing him tumble again, Mr. Baz changed his mind. He gave up pursuing Gaynek and swooped down after Johore. Well, you know Gaynek. He dipped to the rescue of Johore, circling and curving swiftly as a coil of lightning, leading Mrs. Baz panting after him. She could not make as many curves as Gaynek, no, not nearly so many. But Mr. Baz, who was a veteran, had flown up and up to take aim. This put Johore in danger. One more wrong turn and Mr. Baz would have him. Alas, poor bird, he did the thing he should not have done. He flew in a straight line below Mr. Baz, who at once shut his wings and fell like a thunderclap of silence. No noise could be heard, not even the shadow of a sound. Down, down, down he fell, the very image of death. Then the most terrible thing happened. Between him and Johore slipped, none knew how, Gaynek, in order to save the latter and frustrate the enemy. Alas! Instead of giving up the attack, the Baz shot out his talons, catching a somewhat insecure hold of the intruder. A shower of feathers covered the air. One could almost see Gaynek's body writhing in the enemy's grip. As if a hot iron had gone through me, I shrieked with pain for my bird, but nothing availed. Round and round, higher and higher, that Baz carried him, trying to get a more secure hold with his talons. I must admit something most humiliating here. I had been so intent on saving Gaynek that I did not notice when Mrs. Baz fell and captured Johore. It must have happened very swiftly right after Gaynek was caught. Now the air was filled with Johore's feathers. The enemy held him fast in her talons, and he made no movement to free himself. But not so Gaynek. He was still writhing in the grip of Mr. Baz. As if to help her husband to grasp his prey more securely, Mrs. Baz flew very close to her lord. Just then Johore struggled to get free. That swung her so near that her wing collided with her husband's. The fellow lost his balance. As he was almost overturned in the air with another shower of feathers, Gaynek wrenched himself free from his grip. Now he dropped down, down, down. In another 30 seconds, a panting, bleeding bird lay on our roof. I lifted him up in order to examine his wound. His 2 sides were torn, but not grievously. At once I took him to the pigeon doctor, who dressed his wounds. It took about half an hour, and when I returned home and put Gaynek in his nest, I could not find Johore anywhere. His nest, alas, was empty. And when I went up to the roof there, I found Johore's wife sitting on the parapet, scanning every direction of the sky for a sign of her husband. Not only did she spend that day, but 2 or 3 more in the same manner. I wonder if she found any consolation in the fact that her husband sacrificed himself for the sake of a brave comrade. Chapter 3. Training and Direction. Now that, like a newly trained diver, he had overcome his fear of plunging into the air, Gaynek ventured on longer and higher flights. In a week's time he was able to fly steadily for half an hour, and when he came home to the roof, he swooped down as gracefully as his parents. There was no more of that panicky beating of wings in order to balance himself as his feet touched the roof. His parents, who had accompanied Gaynek in his preliminary flights, now began to leave him behind and to fly much higher above him. For a while I thought that they were trying to make him fly still higher, for the son always made an effort to reach the level of his parents. Perhaps his elders were setting the little fellow a superb example. But at last, one day, early in June, that explanation of mine was shaken by the following fateful incident. Gaynek was flying high. He looked half his usual size. Above him flew his parents, almost as small as a man's fist. They were circling above him with the regularity of a merry-go-round. It looked monotonous and meaningless. I removed my gaze from them. After all, it is not comfortable to look upward steadily for long. As I lowered my eyes toward the horizon, they were held by a black spot moving swiftly and growing larger every second. I wondered what sort of a bird he was coming at such a speed in a straight line, for in India birds are named in the Sanskrit toryak or curve tracers. But this one was coming straight, like an arrow. In another 2 minutes my doubts were dispelled. It was a hawk making for little Gaynek. I looked up and beheld a miraculous sight. His father was tumbling steadily down in order to reach his level, while his mother, bent on the same purpose, was making swift downward curves. Ere the terrible hawk had come within 10 yards of the innocent little fellow, both his flanks were covered. Now the 3 flew downwards at a right angle from the path of their enemy. Undeterred by such a move, the hawk charged. At once the 3 pigeons made a dip which frustrated him, but the force with which he had made the attack was so great that it carried him a long distance beyond them. The pigeons kept on circling in the air with an ever-increasing downward trend. In another minute they were halfway to our roof. Now the hawk changed his mind. He went higher and higher into the sky. In fact, he flew so high that the pigeons could not hear the wind whistling in the feathers of his wings, and as he was above them, they could not see their foe. Feeling that they were safe, they relaxed. It was evident that they were not flying as fast as before. Just then I saw that above them, way up, the hawk was folding his wings. He was about to drop, and in an instant he fell upon them like a stone. In desperation I put my fingers in my mouth and made a shrill whistle, a cry of warning. The pigeons dived like a falling sword, yet the hawk followed. Inch by inch, moment by moment, he was gaining on them. Faster and faster he fell. Now there was scarcely 20 feet between him and his prey. There was no doubt that he was aiming at Gay Neck. I could see his sinister claws. "Won't those stupid pigeons do anything to save themselves?" I thought in an agony. He was so near him now, if they would only keep their heads, and just then they made a vast upward circle. The hawk followed. Then they flew on an even but large elliptical path. If a bird flies in a circle, he either tends to swing to the center of that circle or away from it. Now the hawk missed their intention and tended toward the center, making a small circle inside their big one. No sooner was his back turned to them than the 3 pigeons made another dive, almost to our roof, but the sinister one was not to be deterred. He followed like a tongue of black lightning. His prey made a curving dive onto the roof, where they were safe at last under my wide-spread arms. That instant I heard the shriek of the wind in the air. About a foot above my head flew by the hawk, his eyes blazing with yellow fire and his claws quivering like the tongue of a viper. As he passed, I could hear the wind still whistling in his feathers. After that narrow escape of my pet birds, I began to train Gay Neck to a sense of direction. One day I took all 3 birds in a cage towards the east of our town. Exactly at 9 in the morning I set them free. They came home safely. The next day I took them an equal distance to the west. Inside of a week they knew the way to our house from within a radius of at least 15 miles in any direction. Since nothing ends smoothly in this world, the training of Gay Neck finally met with a check. I had taken him and his parents down the Ganges in a boat. When we started, it was about 6 in the morning. The sky was littered with stray clouds, and a moderate wind was blowing from the south. Our boat was piled high with rice white as snow, on whose top were heaped mangoes, red and golden in color, like a white peak afire with the sunset. I should have foreseen that such auspicious weather might turn suddenly into a terrible storm, for after all, boy though I was, I knew something about the freaks of the monsoon in June. Hardly had we gone 20 miles before the first rain clouds of the season raced across the sky. The velocity of the wind was so great that it ripped off one of the sails of our boat. Seeing that there was no time to be lost, I opened the cage and released the 3 pigeons. As they struck the wind, they vaulted right over and flew very low, almost falling into the water. They flew thus close to the surface of the river for a quarter of an hour, making very little headway against the hard wind. But they persisted, and another 10 minutes saw them safely tacking and flying landward. Just about the time they had reached the string of villages on our left, the sky grew pitch black. A torrential cloudburst blotted everything out, and we saw nothing but inky sheets of water through which the lightning zigzagged and danced the dance of death. I gave up all hope of finding my pigeons again. We were almost shipwrecked ourselves, but fortunately our boat was beached on the shore of a village. Next morning, when I came home by train, I found 2 wet pigeons instead of 3. Gay Neck's father had perished in the storm. No doubt it was all my fault, and for the few days that followed our house was given up to mourning. The 2 pigeons and I used to go up on the roof whenever the rain left off a bit in order to scan the sky for a glimpse of the father. Alas, he never returned. The next morning the birds flew higher and played with each other. Gaynek again refused to go all the way, and he began to come down hastily instead of circling in the air below her. That puzzled me, but Raja, who was a keen person, explained. A cloud, large as a fan, has come over the sun. Its shadow fell so suddenly that Gaynek thought it was his enemy. Wait until the cloud passes, and then— Raja was right. In a few more seconds the sun came out, and its light dripped from Gaynek's wings once more. At once he stopped coming downwards and began to make circles in the air. His mate, too, who had been coming down to keep him company, waited for him 100 feet or so above. Now Gaynek rose, beating his wings like an eagle freed from his cage. The sunlight made pools of color about him as he swerved and swung up and up. Soon, instead of following, he led his mate. Thus they ascended the sky. He healed of fear completely, and she ravished by his agility and power. The next morning both of them made an early start. They flew far and very long. For a while they were lost beyond the mountains, as if they slid over their peaks and down the other side. They were gone at least an hour. At last they returned about 11 o'clock, bearing each in his beak a large straw. They were going to build a nest for the laying of eggs. I thought I would take them home, but Raja insisted that we should stay at least a week longer. During that week, every day we spent some hours in the more dangerous jungle across the river, taking the 2 pigeons with us in order to release them in the dense forest hardly 5 miles from Raja's house. Gaynek forgot everything save testing his sense of direction and making higher flights. In other words, love for his mate and the change of place and climate healed him of fear that most fell disease. Here let it be inscribed in no equivocal language that almost all our troubles come from fear, worry, and hate. If any man catches one of the 3, the other 2 are added unto it. No beast of prey can kill his victim without frightening him first. In fact, no animal perishes until its destroyer strikes terror into its heart. To put it succinctly, an animal's fear kills it before its enemy gives it the final blow. Chapter 4. Gaynek in the Himalayas. Since the rain and the heat in the plains proved excessive, my family decided to take us to the Himalayas. If you take a map of India, you will find that in its northeast corner is a town called Darjeeling, standing almost face to face with Mount Everest, the highest peak in the world. After traveling not too fast by caravan, several days from Darjeeling, my family, myself, and my 2 pigeons reached the little village of Denton. There we were, 10,000 feet above sea level. At such a height, an American mountain or the Alps would have at least some snow, but in India, which is in the tropics, and on the Himalayas hardly 30 degrees north of the equator, the snow line does not commence under 10,000 feet, and the jungle of the foothills abounding with animals is so cold after September that all its denizens migrate southward. Let me give you just a slight picture of our setting. Our house of stone and mud overlooked small valleys where tea was grown. Beyond, between serried ridges that stuck out in harsh but majestic curves, were valleys full of rice fields, maize, and fruit orchards. Further on rose the dark, evergreen-clad precipices over which reared thousands of feet of pure white ranges, the Kanchenjunga, the Peak Makalu, and the Everest ranges. In the first flush of dawn they looked white, but as the light grew in brightness and the sun rose higher, peak after peak defined itself, not far off in the horizon, but piercing the very middle of the sky, whence poured a flood of crimson light like the very blood of benediction. One usually sees the Himalayas best in the early morning, for they are covered with clouds during the rest of the day. Hindus, who are religious people, get up in good time to behold the sublime hills and to pray to God. Can there be a better setting to prayers than those mountains, most of whose peaks yet remain unexplored and untrodden by man? Their inviolate sanctity is something precious, which remains a perpetual symbol of divinity. Heights like that of the Everest are symbols of the highest reality, God. They are symbolic of God's mystery, too, for with the exception of the early morning, they are, as I have said, shrouded with clouds all day. Foreigners who come to India imagine they would like to see them all the time, but let no one complain, for he who has beheld Everest in its morning grandeur and awe-inspiring glory will say, "It is too sublime to be gazed at all day long." None could bear it continually before his eyes. In July, those early morning views of the Everest are not vouchsafed us every day, for it is the month of rain. All the ranges lie in the grip of the most devastating blizzards. Once in a while, above the battle of storms and driven snow, the peaks appear, a compact mass of hard ice and white fire. They glow intensely in the sunlight, while at their feet the snow clouds whirl and fall like fanatical dervishes dancing frenziedly before their terrible god. During the summer, my friend Raja and our teacher in jungle lore, old Gond, came to visit our home. Raja was about 16 years old, already a Brahmin priest, and Gond we always called Old, for none knew his age. Both Raja and I were handed over to that most competent of hunters for the purpose of studying under his guidance the secrets of jungle and animal life. Since I have described them in my other books, I need not repeat myself here. As soon as we had settled down in Denham, I began to train my pigeons in the art of direction. Whenever we had a clear day, we climbed all the forenoon toward the higher peaks amid ilexes and balsam forests, and released our birds from some monastery roof or from the house of a nobleman. And toward evening, when we returned home, we invariably found Gay Neck and his mother there before us. We had hardly half a dozen clear days during the whole month of July, but under the guidance of the almost omniscient Gond, and with my friend Raja, we traveled very far in a short time. We visited and stayed with all classes of the mountain folk, who looked much like Chinese. Their manners were elegant and their hospitality generous. Of course, we took the pigeons with us, sometimes in a cage, but most of the time under our tunics. Though we were frequently soaked with rain, Gay Neck and his mother were religiously guarded from the weather. Towards the end of July, we made a journey beyond every Lamasery monastery and Baron's castle of Sikkim that we 3 human beings and the 2 pigeons had seen and known. We passed Singalele, where there was a nice little Lamasery, on toward Falut and the unknown. At last we reached the homeland of the eagles. Around us were bare granite cliffs surrounded by fir trees and stunted pines. Before us to the north lay the Kanchenjunga and the Everest ranges. Here, on the edge of an abyss, we released our 2 birds. In that exhilarating air they flew like children running from school at the end of the day. Gay Neck's mother flew far upwards in order to show her son the sublime heights. After the 2 birds had flown away, we 3 men talked of what they might be seeing as they sped above the altitudes. Before them, no doubt, rose the twin peaks of the Kanchenjunga group, slightly lower than Mount Everest, but just as impeccable and austere as that immaculate peak untrodden still by the feet of men. That fact roused profound emotions in us. We saw the mountain in the distance just for a few minutes like a mirror before the face of God. And I said to myself, O thou summit of sanctity, thou inviolate and eternal, may no man tarnish thee, nor may any mortal stain thy purity even by his slightest touch. May thou remain forever unvanquished, O thou backbone of the universe and measurement of immortality. But I have brought you so high not to tell you about mountains, but of an adventure that befell us there. Now that Gay Neck and his mother had flown, we gave up watching them and went in quest of an eagle's nest which was on a neighboring cliff. The Himalayan eagle is brown with a soft golden glow, and though very beautiful to look at, it is in perfect proportion of beauty with strength. Yet it is a fierce beast of prey. But at first, on this particular afternoon, we encountered nothing savage. On the contrary, we found two fluffy white eaglets in an eyrie. They looked as engaging as newborn babes. The southern wind was blowing right in their eyes, but they did not mind it. It is in the nature of the Himalayan eagle to build his nest facing the direction of the wind. Why? No one knows. Apparently, the bird likes to face that which he floats up on. The younglings were nearly 3 weeks old, for they were already shedding their birthday cotton-like appearance and had begun to grow real plumage. Their talons were sharp enough for their age, and their beaks hard and keen. An eagle's eyrie is open and large. Its entrance ledge, that is to say landing place, is about 6 or 7 feet wide and quite clean. But within, where it is dark and narrow, there is a perfect litter of twigs, branches, and a little of the hair and feathers of victims, every other part of their prey being devoured by the eaglets. The parents devour most of the bones, hair, and feathers with the meat. Though the surrounding country was clad in stunted pine trees, yet it was full of bird noises. Also strange insects buzzed in the fir trees. Jeweled flies fluttered on blue wings over mauve orchids, and enormous rhododendrons glowed in sizes sometimes as large as the moon. Now and then a wild cat called, apparently talking in his noonday sleep. Suddenly Gon told us to run 12 yards and hide in a bush. Hardly had we done so when the noises about us began to subside. In another 60 seconds the insects stopped their buzzing, the birds ceased to call, and even the trees seemed to grow still with expectation. In the air slowly rose the thin whistle of something. In a few moments it fell into a lower key. Hard upon it came a weird noise, almost sounding like a shriek, and a giant bird flew down to the eagle's eyrie. The wind was still whistling in its wings. By its size, Gon thought it was the mother of the 2 babies. She remained still in the air till the eaglets withdrew into the inner recesses of their home. From her talons hung something well-skinned, like a large rabbit. She landed, dropping her prey on the ledge. One could see that her wings from tip to tip measured 6 feet. She folded them as a man folds a paper. Then, seeing that her children were coming toward her, she drew in her talons lest they pierce their unarmored tender flesh. Now she hobbled like a cripple. The 2 little fellows ran and disappeared under her half-open wings, but they did not want to be brooded, for they were hungry. So she led them outward to the dead rabbit, tore away some of its flesh, excluded any bone that clung to it, and gave it to them to swallow. Again from below and all about, the insects and birds resumed their noises. We rose from our hiding and started homeward after Raja and I had extracted a promise from Gond that he would bring us back later to see the full-fledged eaglets. And so in a little over a month we returned. We brought with us Gaynek and his mother, for I wished the little fellow to fly the village, Lamazari, lake, and river, as well as the beasts and the other birds, cranes, parrots, Himalayan herons, wild geese, divers, sparrowhawks, and swifts. On this trip we went about 100 yards beyond the eagle's nest. The finger of autumn had already touched the rhododendrons. Their flaming petals were falling out, their long stems, many feet high, rustled in the winds. Leaves of many trees had begun to turn, and the air was full of melancholy. At about 11 we uncaged our pigeons, who flew away into the sapphire sky that hung like a sail from the white peaks. They had flown for about half an hour when a hawk appeared above them. It drew nearer the 2 pigeons, and then drove at them. But the prey proved too wary. They escaped scatheless. Just as Gaynek and his mother were coming down swiftly to where the trees were, the hawk's mate appeared and attacked. She flew at them as her husband had done without gaining her objective. Seeing that their prey was escaping, the male hawk cried shrilly to his mate. At that she stopped in the air, just marking time. The pigeons, feeling safe, quickened their wing motion and flew southward while the 2 hawks followed, converging upon them from the east and the west. Wing beat upon wing beat they gained on the pigeons. Their wings, shaped like a butcher's hatchet, tipped off at the end, cut through the air like a storm. 1, 2, 3. They fell like spears. Gay-Neck's mother stopped and just floated in the air. That upset the calculation of the hawks. What to do now? Which one to fall upon? Such questioning takes time, and Gay-Neck seized the chance to change his course. Swiftly he rose higher and higher. In a few moments his example was followed by his mother, but she had lost time, and the hawks rose almost vaulting up to her. Then, apparently, a sudden panic seized her. She was afraid that the hawks were after her son, and in order to protect him, which was utterly unnecessary, she flew toward the two pursuers. In another minute both of those birds of prey had pounced upon her. The air was filled with a shower of feathers. The sight frightened Gay-Neck, who fell upon the nearest cliff for protection and safety. It was his mother's error that deprived her of her own life, and probably imperiled that of her son. We 3 human beings began a search for the cliff where Gay-Neck had fallen. It was no easy task, for the Himalayas are very treacherous. Pythons, if not tigers, were to be feared. Yet my friend Raja insisted, and Gond the hunter agreed with him, saying that it would augment our knowledge. We descended from the cliff that we were on, and entered a narrow gorge where the raw bones lying on the ground convinced us that some beast of prey had dined on its victim the previous night. But we were not frightened, for our leader was Gond, the most well-equipped hunter of Bengal. Very soon we began a laborious climb through clefts and crevices full of purple orchids on green moss. The odor of fir and balsam filled our nostrils. Sometimes we saw a rhododendron still in bloom. The air was cold and the climb unending. After 2 in the afternoon, having lunched on a handful of chola dried beans softened in water, we reached the cliff where Gay-Neck was hiding. To our surprise, we discovered that it was the eagle's nest with 2 eaglets, the babies of our previous visit, now full-fledged. They were sitting on the front ledge of their eyrie, while to our utter amazement we saw Gay-Neck at the farthest corner of a neighboring ledge, cowering and weak. At our approach, the eaglets came forward to attack us with their beaks. Raja, whose hand was nearest, received an awful stroke which ripped open the skin of his thumb, whence blood flowed freely. The eagles were between us and Gay-Neck, and there was nothing to be done but to climb over a higher cliff to reach him. Hardly had we gone 6 yards away from the nest when Gond signed to us to hide as we had done the first time we had come. We did so with celerity, under a pine, and soon, with a soft roar in the air, one of the parent eagles drew near. In a few seconds there fell a high-pitched sound as the eagle sailed into its nest. A shiver of exquisite pleasure ran up and down my spine as her tail feather grazed our tree, and I heard that whistling mute itself. Let me re-emphasize the fact that people who have an idea that the eagle builds its nest on an isolated, inaccessible cliff are mistaken. A powerful bird or beast does not have to be so careful in choosing its home. It can afford to be negligent. The nest of such a gigantic bird must have as its first requirement space so that it can open and shut its wings in the outer court of its home, and a place so spacious cannot be too inaccessible. Next, the eagle has no knack at building nests. It chooses a ledge that juts out of a cliff cavern where nature has already performed 2/3 of the task. The last third is done by the birds themselves, and it merely consists in getting branches, leaves, and blades of grass together as a rough bed where the eggs may be laid and hatched. All those details we gathered as we crawled out of our hiding place and examined, for the second time, the eyrie from a distance. There was no doubt that they were our old friends, the 2 babies, grown big, and their mother. She, even now, though they were grown up, drew in her talons as a matter of habit lest they hurt her children. But it was momentary. After she had made sure that they were racing to meet her, She opened them and stood firmly on the outer ledge. The eaglets, though they should not be called so now that they were full-fledged, rushed forward and took shelter under her wide-spread wings. But the little beasts did not stay there long. They did not want to be loved. They were very hungry. They wanted something to eat, and alas, she had brought nothing. At that they turned from her and sat facing the wind, waiting. At Gon's signal we all three rose and began to climb. In the course of another hour we had crawled in lizard-like silence over the roof of the eagle's nest. Just as I passed over it, an abominable odor of bones and drying flesh greeted my nostrils. That proved that the eagle, king of birds though he is not as clean and tidy as a pigeon. I, for one, prefer a pigeon's nest to an eagle's eyrie. Soon we reached Gay Neck and tried to put him in his cage. He was glad to see us, but fought shy of the cage. Since it was getting late, I gave him some lentils to eat. Just about the middle of his meal, seeing him deeply absorbed in eating, I made an effort to grab him with my hand. That frightened the poor bird, and he flew away. The noise of his flight brought the mother eagle out of the inner recess of her nest. She looked out, her beak quivering and her wings almost opening for flight. At once all the jungle noises below were stilled, and she sailed away. We felt that all was over for Gay Neck. Suddenly a shadow fell upon him. I thought it was the eagle pouncing. However, it only rested on him a moment and then receded. But he had had the fright of his life, and he flew away, driven by sheer terror in a zigzag course far beyond our sight. I was convinced that we had lost Gay Neck, but Gond insisted that we would find the bird in a day or two, so we decided to wait and spend our time there. Night came on apace, and we sought shelter under some pines. The next morning we were told by Gond that the day had come for the young eagles to fly. He concluded, "Eagles never give their children lessons in flight. They know when their eaglets are ready for it. Then the parents leave forever." All that day the parent eagle did not revisit her nest. When night came again, her children gave up all hope of her return and withdrew into the inner part of their home. It proved a memorable night for us. We were so far up that we were quite sure of no attack by a four-footed beast of prey. Tigers and leopards go downwards, not that they fear the heights, but because, like all animals, they follow their food. Antelopes, deer, bison, and wild boars graze where valleys and jungle growth are plentiful, and since they go where grass, sapling, luscious twigs, in short, their dinner, grows on river banks, those who live by eating them search for them there. That is why, with the exception of birds and a few animals such as wild cats, pythons, and snow leopards, the heights are free of beasts of prey. Even the yak, who takes the place of the cow, does not climb so high very frequently or in large numbers. One or two mountain goats one sees occasionally, but nothing larger, and so our night was free of any dramatic experience. But this was amply compensated for by the piercing cold that possessed and shook our bodies in the early dawn. Sleep was out of the question, so I sat up, and wrapping all the blankets of my bedding around me, watched and listened. The stillness was intense, like a drum whose skin had been so stretched that even breathing on it would make it groan. I felt hemmed in by the piercing soundlessness from every direction. Now and then, like an explosion, came the crackling of some dry autumn leaves, as a soft-footed wild cat leaped on them from the branch of a tree not far away. That sound very soon sank like a stone in the ever-rising tide of stillness. Slowly, one by one, the stars set. The rising tide of mystery that was reigning everywhere deepened, when, like the shaking of lances, something shivered in the eagle's eyrie. There was no doubt now that the day was breaking. Again rose the same sound from the same place. The eagles were preening their wings as a man stretches himself before fully waking from sleep. Now I could hear a rustle nearby that I thought must be the two eagles coming forward on the front ledge of their nest. Soon came other noises. Storks flew by overhead. Strange birds like cranes shouldered the sky. And nearby the bellow of a yak tore the stillness asunder as if he had put his horn through the skin of a drum. Far down, birds called one another. At last fell a white light on the Kanchenjunga range. Then Mokulu appeared with an immense halo of opal back of his head. The lower ranges, as high as Mont Blanc, put on their vesture of milk-white glory. Shapes and colors of stone and tree leaped into sight. Orchids trembled with morning dew. Now the sun, like a lion, leaped on the shoulder of the sky, and the snow-bastioned horizons bled with scarlet fire. Gond and Raja, who had been awake already, stood up. Then the latter, a well-trained priest, chanted the Sanskrit Vedic prayer to Savitar. The sun, O thou blossom of eastern silence, take thy ancient way untrodden of men. Go on thy dustless path of mystery. Reach thou the golden throne of God, and be our advocate, before his silence and his compassionate speechlessness. The prayer frightened the eagles, unaccustomed to human voices. But ere they were excited to fury, our little ritual was over, and we hid ourselves under the stunted pine. The eagles, left without any breakfast, looked out and scanned the sky for a sign of their parent. They gazed below where flocks of parrots and jays flew, small as humming birds. Wild geese came trailing across the snowy peaks where they had spent the night on their journey southward. Soon they too grew small as beetles and melted into space. Hour after hour passed, yet no sight of the big eagle. The full-fledged eaglets felt hungrier and began to fret in their nest. We heard a quarrel going on in the interior of the eyrie, which grew in intensity and noise till one of them left home in disgust and began to climb the cliff. He went higher and higher. Up and up he walked without using his wings. By now it was past midday. We had luncheon, yet still there was no sight of the parent birds. We judged that the eagle left in the nest was the sister, for she looked smaller than the other eaglet. She sat facing the wind, peering into the distance, but she too grew downhearted. Strange though it may sound, I have yet to see a Himalayan eagle which does not sit facing the wind from the time of its birth until it learns to fly, as a sailor boy might sit looking at the sea until he takes to navigating it. About 2 in the afternoon, that eagle grew tired of waiting in the nest. She set out in quest of her brother, who was now perching on the top of a cliff far above. He too was facing the wind. As his sister came up, his eyes brightened. He was glad not to be alone, and the sight of her saved him from the melancholy thought of flying for food. No eagle child have I seen being taught to fly by its parents. That is why younglings will not open their wings until driven by hunger. The parent eagles know this very well, and that is why when their babies grow up and the time has come, they leave them and go away. The little sister laboriously climbed till she reached her brother's side, but alas, there was no room for 2. Instead of balancing themselves on their perch, the sister's weight knocked her brother almost over. Instantly he opened his wings wide. The wind bore him up. He stretched out his talons, but too late to reach the ground. He was at least 2 feet up in the air already, so he flapped his wings and rose a little higher. He dipped his tail, which acted like a rudder, and swung him sideways, east, south, east. He swung over us, and we could hear the wind crooning in his wings. Just at that moment, a solemn silence fell on everything. The noises of insects stopped. Rabbits, if there were rabbits, hid in their holes. Even the leaves seemed to listen in silence to the wing beats of this new monarch of the air as he sailed higher and higher. And he had to go way up, for only by going very far could he find what he sought. Sometimes 1,800 to 3,000 feet below him, an eagle sees a hare hopping about on the ground. Then he folds his wings and roars down the air like lightning. The terrible sound of his coming almost hypnotizes the poor creature and holds him bound to the spot, listening to his enemy's thunderous approach, and then the eagle's talons pierce him. Seeing her brother go off in this way, and being afraid of loneliness, the sister suddenly spread her wings too. The wind blowing from under threw her up. She also floated in the air and tacked her flight by her tail toward her comrade, and in a few minutes both were lost to sight. Now it was our turn to depart from those hills in search of our pigeon. He might have gone to Denton, but it behoved us to search every Lamasery and baronial castle which had served Gay Neck as a landmark in his past flights. Chapter 5. On Gay Neck's track. As we descended into the bleak oblivion of the gorges below, we suddenly found ourselves in a world of deepening dark, though it was hardly 3 in the afternoon. It was due to the long shadows of the tall summits under which we moved. We hastened our pace, and the cold air goaded us on. As soon as we had descended about 1,000 feet and more, it grew warmer by comparison. But as night came on apace, the temperature dropped anew and drove us to seek shelter in a friendly Lamasery. We reached that particular serai where the lamas, Buddhist monks, most generously offered us hospitality. They spoke to us only as they had occasion in serving us with supper and in escorting us to our rooms. They spend their evenings in meditation. We had 3 small cells cut out of the side of a hill, in front of which was a patch of grassy lawn railed off at the outer edges. By the light of the lanthorns we carried, we found that we had only straw mattresses in our stone cells. However, the night passed quickly, for we were so tired that we slept like children in their mother's arms. About 4 o'clock next morning I heard many footsteps that roused me, and soon I discerned bright lights. By climbing down and then up a series of high steps, I reached the central chapel of the Lamasery, a vast cave under an overhanging rock and open on 3 sides. There before me stood 8 lamas with lanthorns, which they quietly put away as they then sat down to meditate, their legs crossed under them. The dim light fell on their tawny faces and blue robes, and revealed on their countenances only peace and love. Presently their leader said to me in Hindustani, "It has been our practice for centuries to pray for all who sleep. At this hour of the night, even the insomnia-stricken person finds oblivion, and since men, when they sleep, cannot possess their conscious thoughts, we pray that eternal compassion may purify them, so that when they awake in the morning, they will begin their day with thoughts that are pure, kind, and brave. Will you meditate with us?" I agreed readily. We sat praying for compassion for all mankind. Even to this day, when I awake early, I think of those Buddhist monks in the Himalayas praying for the cleansing of the thoughts of all men and women still asleep. The day broke soon enough. I found that we were sitting in a cleft of a mountain, and at our feet lay a precipice sheer and stark. The tinkling of silver bells rose softly in the sunlit air. Bells upon bells, silver and golden, chimed gently and filled the air with their sweet music. It was the monk's greeting to the harbinger of light. The sun rose as a clarion cry of triumph, of light over darkness, and of life over death. Below I met Raja and Gond at breakfast. It was then that a monk who served us said, "Your pigeon came here for shelter yesterday." He gave a description of Gay Neck, accurate even to the nature of his nose wattle, its size and color. Gond asked, "How do you know we seek a pigeon?" The flat-faced lama, without even turning an eyelash, said in a matter-of-fact tone, "I can read your thoughts." Raja questioned with eagerness, "How can you read our thoughts?" The monk answered, "If you pray to eternal compassion for 4 hours a day for the happiness of all that live, in the course of a dozen years, he gives you the power to read some people's thoughts, especially the thoughts of those who come here. Your pigeon we fed and healed of his fear when he took shelter with us." "Healed of fear, my lord," I exclaimed. The lama affirmed most simply, yes, he was deeply frightened. So I took him in my hands and stroked his head and told him not to be afraid. Then yestermorn I let him go. No harm will come to him. Can you give your reason for saying so, my lord? Asked Gond politely. The man of God replied to him thus: You must know, O jewel amongst hunters, that no animal, nor any man, is attacked and killed by an enemy until the latter succeeds in frightening him. I have seen even rabbits escape hounds and foxes when they kept themselves free of fear. Fear clouds one's wits and paralyses one's nerve. He who allows himself to be frightened lets himself be killed. But how do you heal a bird of fear, my lord? To that question of Rajas the Holy One answered, If you are without fear, and you keep not only your thoughts pure, but also your sleep untainted of any fear, laden dreams for months, then whatever you touch will become utterly fearless. Your pigeon now is without fear, for I, who held him in my hand, have not been afraid in thought, deed, and dream for nearly 20 years. At present your pet bird is safe, no harm will come to him. By the calm conviction in his words, spoken without emphasis, I felt that in truth Gay Neck was safe, and in order to lose no more time, I said farewell to the devotees of Buddha and started south. Let me say that I firmly believe that the lamas were right. If you pray for other people every morning, you can enable them to begin their day with thoughts of purity, courage, and love. Now we dropped rapidly towards Denham. Our journey lay through places that grew hotter and more familiar. No more did we see the rhododendrons. The autumn that further up had touched the leaves of trees with crimson, gold, cerise, and copper was not so advanced here. The cherry trees still bore their fruits. The moss had grown on trees thickly, and the wind had blown on them the pollen of orchids, large as the palm of your hand, blossoming in purple and scarlet. Many white daturas perspired with dewdrops in the steaming heat of the sun. The trees began to appear taller and terrible. Bamboos soared upwards like sky-piercing minarets. Creepers thick as pythons beset our path. The buzzing of the cicada grew insistent and unbearable, and jays jabbered in the woods. Now and then a flock of green parrots flung their emerald glory in the face of the sun, then vanished. Insects multiplied. Mammoth butterflies, velvety black, swarmed from blossom to blossom, and innumerable small birds preyed on numberless buzzing flies. We were stung with the sharpest stings of worms, and now and then we had to wait to let pass a serpent that crossed our path. Were it not for the practiced eyes of Gond, who knew which way the animals came and went, we would have been killed 10 times over by a snake or a bison. Sometimes Gond would put his ear to the ground and listen. After several minutes he would say, Ahead of us bisons are coming. Let us wait till they pass. And soon enough we would hear their sharp hoofs moving through the undergrowth with a sinister noise, as if a vast scythe were cutting the very ground from under our feet. Yet we pressed on, stopping for half an hour for lunch. At last we reached the borders of Sikkim, whose small valley glimmered with ripening red millet, green oranges, and golden bananas, set against hillsides glittering with marigolds, above which softly shone the violets. Just then we came to a sight that I shall never forget. At our feet on the narrow caravan road, the air burnt in iridescence. The heat was so great that it vibrated with colors. Hardly had we gone a few yards when, like a thunderclap, rose a vast flock of Himalayan pheasants. Then they flew into the jungle, their wings burning like peacocks' plumes in the warm air. We kept on moving. In another couple of minutes flew up another flock, but these were mud-colored birds. In my perplexity, I asked Gond for an explanation. He said, Do you not see, O beloved of felicity? The caravan that passed here was loaded with millet. One of their sacks had a hole in it. A few handfuls of millet leaked out on the road before the sack was sewn up. Later on arrived these birds and fed themselves here. We came upon them suddenly and frightened them to flight. But, O diadem of wisdom, I asked, why do the males look so gorgeous, and why are the females mud-colored? Is nature always partial to the male? Gond made the following explanation. It is said that Mother Nature has given all birds the colors that hide them from their enemies. But do you not see that those pheasants are so full of splendor that they can be sighted and killed even by a blind man? Raja exclaimed. Can they? Gond answered. Oh, worry beyond thy years, no. The real reason is that they live on trees and do not come down before the earth is very hot. In this hot India of ours, the air 2 inches above the ground is so burning that it quivers with 1,000 colors, and the plumage of the pheasant is similar. When we look at them, we do not see birds, but the many-colored air which camouflages them completely. We almost walked on them a few moments ago, thinking them but a part of the road at our feet. That I comprehend, resumed Raja reverently. But why did the female look mud-colored, and why did they not fly away with the male? Gond answered without hesitation. When the enemy approaches and takes them by surprise, the male flies up to face the enemy's bullets, though without thought of chivalry. The female's wings are not so good. Besides, she, being of the color of the earth, opens her wings to shelter her babies under them, then lies flat on the ground. Enemy goes away in quest of the corpses of their already slaughtered husbands. The females run away with their babies into the nearest thicket. And if it is not too late in the year, and if their grown-up babies are not with them, the mother birds singly flop to the ground and lie there, making the gesture of protecting their young. Self-sacrifice becomes a habit with them, and habitually they put forth their wings, whether they have any young ones with them or not. That is what they were doing when we came upon them. Then suddenly they realized that they were without anyone to protect, and as we still kept on coming down upon them, they took to flight, poor flyers though they are. With the approach of dusk, we took shelter in the house of a Sikkimese nobleman whose son was a friend of ours. There we found further traces of Gay Neck, who had been to their house many times before, and so when he reached the familiar place on his latest visit, he had eaten millet seeds, drunk water, and taken his bath. Also, he had preened his wings and left 2 small azure feathers which my friend had preserved for the sake of their coloring. When I saw them, my heart leapt in joy, and that night I slept in utter peace and contentment. There was another reason for sleeping well, for Gond had told us to rest deeply, as after the following day's march we were to spend the night in the jungle. The next night, when we sat on that treetop in the deep jungle, often did I think of the home of my Sikkimese friend and its comforts. Imagine yourself marching all day, then spending the night on a vast banyan tree in the very heart of a dangerous forest. It took us a little over half an hour to find that tree, for banyans do not often grow in high altitudes, and also the same reason that made us choose the banyan made us look for a very large one of its kind. It would be of no use to us if it were slender enough for an elephant to break down by walking backwards against it. That is how the pachyderm destroys some very stout trees. We looked for something tall and so stout that no elephant could reach its upper branches with his trunk, and not even 2 tuskers could break it by pushing against it with their double weight. At last we found a tree to our liking. Raja stood on Gond's shoulder and I on Raja's, until we reached branches as thick as a man's torso. I climbed and sat on one of them, and from it let down our rope ladder, which we always carried in the jungle for emergencies such as the present one. Raja climbed up and sat near me, then Gond ascended the branch and sat between us. Now we saw that below us, where Gond had stood, it had not only grown dark as the heart of a coal mine, but there glowed 2 green lights set very close to one another. We knew too well whose they were. Gond exclaimed jovially, "Had I been delayed down there 2 extra minutes, the striped fellow would have killed me." Seeing that his prey had escaped him, the tiger gave a thunderous yell, scourging the air like a curse. At once a tense silence fell and smothered all the noises of insects and little beasts, and it descended further and deeper until it sank into the earth and seemed to grip the very roots of the trees. We made ourselves secure on our perch, and Gon passed the extremely flexible rope ladder around his waist, then Raj's, then mine, fastening the rest of it around the main trunk of the tree. We tested it by letting it bear the weight of one of us at a time. This precaution was taken for the purpose of preventing a sleep-stricken member of our group from slipping down to the floor of the jungle, for after all, in sleep the body relaxes so that it falls like a stone. Finally, Gond arranged his arms for pillows for our heads when slumber came. Now that we had taken all the necessary precautions, we concentrated our attention on what was happening below. The tiger had vanished from under our tree. The insects had resumed their song, which was again and again stilled for a few seconds as huge shapes fell from far-off trees with soft thuds. Those were leopards and panthers who had slept on the trees all day and were now leaping down to hunt at night. When they had gone, the frogs croaked, insects buzzed continually, and owls hooted. Noise, like a diamond, opened its million facets. Sounds leapt at one's hearing like the dart of sunlight into unprotected eyes. A boar passed, cracking and breaking all before him. Soon the frogs stopped croaking, and way down on the floor of the jungle we heard the tall grass and other undergrowth rise like a haycock, then with a sigh fall back. That soft, sinister sigh, like the curling up of spindrift, drew nearer and nearer. Then it slowly passed our tree. Oh, what a relief! It was a constrictor going to the waterhole. We stayed on our treetop as still as its bark. Gond was afraid that our breathing might betray our position to the terrible python. A few minutes later we heard one or two snappings of small twigs, almost as faint as a man cracking his fingers. It was a stag whose antlers had got caught in some vines, and he was snapping them to get himself freed. Hardly had he passed when the jungle grew very tense with expectation. Sounds began to die down. Out of the 10 or a dozen different noises that we had heard all at once, there now remained only 3. The insect's tick-tack-tock, the short wail of the stag. No doubt the constrictor was strangling him near the waterhole, and the wind overhead. Now the elephants were coming. Hattis elephants, about 50 in a herd, came and played around the place below us. The squeal of the females, the grunt of the males, and the run of the babies filled the air. I do not remember what happened next, for I had dozed off into a sort of waking sleep, and in that condition I heard myself talking pigeon language to Gayneck. I was experiencing a deep confusion of sleep and dream. Someone shook and roused me. To my utter amazement, Gond whispered, "I cannot hold you any more. Wake up! Mischief is abroad!" A mad elephant has been left behind. The straggler is bent on harm. We are not high enough to be altogether out of the reach of his trunk, and if he raises it far enough he will scent our presence. Wild elephants hate and fear man, and once he gets our odor, he may stay about here all day in order to find out where we are. Rouse thy vigilance, lad. Draw the blade of alertness before the enemy strikes. There was no mistake about that elephant. In the pale light of early dawn, I could discern a sort of hillock darkly moving about under our tree. He was going from tree to tree and snapping off a few succulent twigs that autumn had not yet blighted. He seemed greedy and bent on gorging himself with those delicacies, rare for the time of the year. In about half an hour he performed a strange trick, putting his forefeet on the bole of a thick tree and swinging up his trunk. It gave him the appearance of a far-spreading mammoth. With that enormously long reach, he almost touched the top of the tree and twisted the most delectable branches off its boughs. After having denuded it of its good twigs, he came to a tree next to ours, and there did the same thing. Now he found a slender tree which he pulled down with his trunk, and placed his forefeet on the poor bent thing and broke it with a crash under his own weight. He ate all that he could of that one. While he was breakfasting thus, his rampage frightened the birds and monkeys, who flew in the air or ran from tree to tree, jabbering in terror. Then the elephant put his feet on the stump of the broken tree and reached up into ours until he touched the branch on which we sat. Hardly had he done so when he squealed, for the odor of man all beasts fear, and swiftly withdrew his trunk. After grunting and complaining to himself, he put up his trunk again very near Gon's face. Just then Gon sneezed almost into the elephant's nostrils. That struck panic into the latter's heart. He felt beleaguered by men. Trumpeting and squealing like a frightened fiend, he dashed through the jungle, breaking and smashing everything before him. Again the parrots, thick as green sails, flew in the sky. Monkeys screamed and raced from tree to tree. Boars and stags stampeded on the floors of the jungle. For a while, the din and tumult reigned unchecked. We had to wait some time before we dared to descend from our perch in order to resume our homeward journey. Late that day we reached home after being carried on horseback by a caravan which we were fortunate enough to meet. All three of us were dead tired, but we forgot our fatigue when we beheld Gay Neck in his nest in our house at Denton. Oh, what joy! That evening before I went to sleep I thought of the calm, quiet assurance of the Lama who said, "Your bird is safe." Chapter 6. Goi Neck's Truancy. But the day after our return, Gay Neck flew away again in the morning and failed to put in an appearance later. We waited for him most anxiously during 4 successive days, and then, unable to bear the suspense any longer, Gond and I set out in search of him, determined to find him, dead or alive. This time we hired 2 ponies to take us as far as Sikkim. We had made sure of our path by asking people about Gay Neck in each village that we had to pass through. Most of them had seen the bird, and some of them gave an accurate description of him. One hunter had seen him in a lamazari nesting next to a swift under the eaves of the house. Another, a Buddhist monk, said that he had seen him near their monastery in Sikkim on a riverbank where wild ducks had their nest, and in the latest village that we passed through on the second afternoon we were told that he was seen in the company of a flock of swifts. Led by such good accounts, we reached the highest tableland of Sikkim, and were forced to bivouac there the 3rd night. Our ponies were sleepy, and so were we, but after what seemed like an hour's sleep, I was roused by a tenseness that had fallen upon everything. I found the 2 beasts of burden standing stiff. In the light of the fire and that of the risen half-moon, I saw that their ears were raised tensely in the act of listening carefully. Even their tails did not move. I, too, listened intently. There was no doubt that the silence of the night was more than mere stillness. Stillness is empty, but the silence that beset us was full of meaning, as if a god shod with moonlight was walking so close that if I were to put out my hand I could touch his garment. Just then the horses moved their ears as if to catch the echo of a sound that had moved imperceptibly through the silence. The great deity had gone already. Now a queer sensation of easing the tense atmosphere set in. One could feel even the faintest shiver of the grass, but that too was momentary. The ponies now listened for a new sound from the north. They were straining every nerve in the effort. At last even I could hear it. Something like a child yawning in his sleep became audible. Stillness again followed. Then a sighing sound, long drawn out, ran through the air, which sank lower and lower like a thick green leaf slowly sinking through calm water. Then rose a murmur on the horizon, as if someone were praying against the skyline. About a minute later the horses relaxed their ears and switched their tails, and I, too, felt myself at ease. Lo! Thousands of geese were flying through the upper air. They were at least 4,000 feet above us, but all the same the ponies heard their coming long before I did. The flight of the geese told us that dawn was at hand, and I sat up and watched. The stars set one by one. The ponies began to graze. I gave them more rope. Now that the night had passed, they did not need to be tied so close to the fire. In another 10 minutes, the intense stillness of the dawn held all things in its grip, and that had its effect on our two beasts. This time I could see clearly, both of them lifting their heads and listening. What sounds were they trying to catch? I did not have long to wait. In a tree not far off, a bird shook itself. Then another did the same thing on another bough. One of them sang. It was a song sparrow, and its cry roused all nature. Other song sparrows trilled, then other birds, and still others. By now shapes and colors were coming to light with blinding rapidity. Thus passed the short tropical twilight, and Gond got up to say his prayers. That day our wanderings brought us to the Lamasery near Singhalê, of which I have spoken before. The Lamas were glad to give us all the news of Gaynek. They informed me that the previous afternoon Gaynek and the flock of swifts who nested under the eaves of the monastery had flown southwards. Again, with the blessings of the Lamas, we said farewell to their hospitable serai and set out on Gaynek's trail. The mountains burnt like torches behind us as we bestowed on them our last look. Before us lay the autumn-tinted woods glimmering in gold, purple, green, and cerise. At last he reached a place where a lot of men were bivouacking. He had to skirt around them softly, still pressing forward. He heard a strange noise right at his feet. He stopped and listened. No mistake, this was a familiar sound. He waited. The steps of an animal. Patter-pat, patter-er-er-er. Gond moved towards the sound, and a suppressed growl ensued. Instead of fear, joy gripped his heart. He who had spent nights at a time in the tiger-infested jungles of India was not to be deterred by the growl of a wild dog. Soon enough, two red eyes greeted his vision. Gond sniffed the air before him carefully as he stood there, and lo, he could not detect there was the slightest odor of man about that dog. The creature had gone wild. The dog, too, was sniffing the air to find out what kind of a being he was facing, for Gond did not exude the usual human odor of fear, and so he came forward and rubbed against him and sniffed vigorously. Fortunately, Gond carried Gaynek above the dog's nose, and the odor of the bird's presence was carried up by the wind, so the wild dog perceived in the man before him nothing but a friendly, fearless fellow. He wagged his tail and whined. Gond, instead of patting his head with his hand, slowly put it before the dog's eyes to see and smell. A moment of suspense followed. Was the dog going to bite the hand? Another moment passed. Then the dog licked it. He now whined with pleasure. Gond said to himself, "So this hunter's dog is without a master. Probably his master is dead. The poor beast has become wild as a wolf. He lives by preying on the food supply of the German army, for it is evident he has not yet eaten any human flesh." So much the better. Gond whistled softly, the call of all hunters of all ages, no matter in what country. It meant lead, and the dog led. He skirted all the bivouacs of the German soldiers as deftly as a stag slips by a tiger's den. After hours of wandering, they reached their destination. There was no mistake about it. Gond had found the very depot not only of munitions, but also of German food supplies. His leader, the wild dog, went through a secret hole in the ground, then after half an hour emerged with a large leg of veal between his jaws. That it was bovine meat, Gond could tell by its odor. The dog sat down to his dinner on the frosty ground while the man put on his boots, which he had carried slung over his shoulder all night long, and then looked up and took observations. By the position of the stars he could tell where he was. He waited there some time. Slowly the day began to break. He took out a compass from his pocket. Yes, he felt quite sure that he could draw a map of the place. Just then the dog jumped up and grabbed Gond's coat with his teeth. There was no doubt in his mind that the dog wanted to lead him on again. He ran ahead, and Gond followed as fast. Soon they reached a spot so thickly covered with thorns and frozen vines that passage through it was possible only for an animal. The dog crawled under a lot of sharp thorns and disappeared. Now Gon drew a diagram showing the position of the stars and the exact position of his compass and tied both to Gaynek's foot and let him go. He watched the pigeon fly from tree to tree, resting on each for a minute or so and preening his wings. Then he struck the message tied to his foot with his beak. Probably he was making sure that it was securely tied, flew up to the top of the tallest tree, and sat there examining the lay of the land. That moment Gond, who was looking up, felt something pull him. He looked down at his feet. The dog was dragging him to a hole under the thorns. He bent low enough to follow his mentor's direction, but at that moment he heard the flutter of wings overhead, then the barking of rifles. He had no desire to get up and investigate whether Gaynek had been killed or not. He crawled down under the thorns till he felt as if his stomach were glued against his backbone, and both sewed tightly to the ground. He pushed and crawled till suddenly he slid down, falling about 8 feet into a dark hole. It was pitch dark, but Gond hardly noticed that at first, for he was occupied in rubbing his bruised head. When finally he tried to discover where he was, he made out that he must be sitting on a frozen waterhole covered like a thieves' den by impenetrable thorn bushes. Even in winter, when no leaf clad the branches and vines overhead, the darkness in daytime was thick there. The dog was still with him and had evidently dragged him there to safety. The poor beast was so happy to have a friend with him that he wanted to play by the hour with Gond. But the latter, being sleepy, dozed off into perfect slumber in spite of the noise of the guns not very far away. After about 3 hours, the dog suddenly whined and then yelled as if he was stricken with madness, after which the earth rocked under terrific sounds of explosion. Unable to bear it, the animal kept tugging the sleeve of Gond's coat. The detonations rose crescendo upon crescendo till the place where Gond lay literally swayed like a cradle, but he would not leave his hiding. All he said to himself was, "Oh, Gaynek, thou incomparable bird, how well thou hast done thy task. Already thou hast borne the message to the cherry-faced chief, and this is his thunderous reply. Oh, thou pearl amongst winged creatures." So on he mumbled while the bombs dropped by aeroplanes ignited the German munition dump. Then the dog, who had been trying to pull him away by the sleeve of his coat, whined and shivered like one in high fever, and that instant something sizzled through the air and fell nearby with a thud. With a desperate yell, the poor dog dashed out of his hiding place. Gond followed, but too late. For hardly had he crept halfway under the thorns than an ear-splitting explosion seemed to cut the ground from under him, and a violent pain pierced his shoulder. He felt borne up by some demoniac power and flung to the ground with great force. Scarlet diamonds of light danced before his eyes for a few moments, followed by quenching darkness. An hour later, when he regained consciousness, the first thing that he became aware of was a sound of Hindustani voices. In order to hear his native language more distinctly, he tried to raise his head. That instant he felt a shooting pain like the sting of 1,000 cobras. There was no doubt in his mind now that he had been hit and probably mortally wounded. All the same, his soul rejoiced every time he heard Hindustani spoken near him, for that meant that Indian troops, and not the enemy, were in possession of the forest now. "Ah," he said to himself, "my task is accomplished. I can die in peace." Chapter 7. Gaynek's Story. In the preceding chapter, 1 made scanty references to the places and incidents through which Gaynek was recovered. Gon found his track with certainty the first day of our 10 days' search for him, but in order to see those things clearly and continuously, it would be better to let Gaynek tell his own odyssey. It is not hard for us to understand him if we use the grammar of fancy and the dictionary of imagination. The October noon when we boarded the train at Darjeeling for our return journey to town, Gayneck sat in his cage and commenced the story of his recent truancy from Denton to Singalele and back. O master of many tongues, O wizard of all languages human and animal, listen to my tale. Listen to the stammering, wandering narrative of a poor bird. Since the river has its roots in the hill, so springs my story from the mountains. When near the eagle's nest I heard and beheld the wicked hawk's talons tear my mother to pieces, I was so distressed that I decided to die, but not by the claws of those treacherous birds. If I was to be served up for a meal, let it be to the king of the air, so I went and sat on the ledge near the eagle's nest, but they would do me no harm. Their house was in mourning. Their father had been trapped and killed, and their mother was away hunting for pheasants and hares. Since up to now the younglings had only eaten what had been killed for them, they dared not attack and finish poor me who was alive. I do not know yet why no eagle has harmed me. During the past days I have seen many. Then you came to catch and cage me. As I was in no mood for human company, I flew away, taking my chances as I went, but I remembered places and persons who were your friends, and I stayed with them on my way south to Denton. During those 2 days, for I flew only 2 days, I was attacked by a newly fledged hawk, and I gave him the best defeat of his life. It was in this wise. One morning, as I was flying over the woods below Sikkim, I heard the wind screech overhead. I knew what that meant now, so I played a trick. I stopped all on a sudden, and the hawk, who was falling upon me, missed me and fell away down, grazing his wing on a treetop. I rose higher and flew fast, but he caught up, and then I began to make circles in the air. I rose high, oh, so high that my lungs could not breathe the air there, and I had to come down again. But no sooner had I descended than with an ominous screech and cry the hawk fell upon me. Fortunately, then and there, for the first time in my life, I tried to tumble as I had seen my father do, and I succeeded in making a double tumble, then shooting up like a fountain. Again the hawk missed and rose to attack, but I gave him no chance. I flew at him, and just as I was passing him, he dipped down, then up, and clutched at me. Again I tumbled, striking him so hard that he lost his balance. I do not know what happened, but that very moment I felt something sucking me down, down to the depth of the earth. My wings were powerless. I fell as an eagle falls, heavy and inevitable, striking the hawk on the head with my full weight. I think the blow stunned him. He too fell, and was lost in the woods below, but I was glad to find myself on the branch of an ilex tree. I had been sucked down by an air current. Since that first experience of mine, I have met many others like it, but I have never understood why it was that above certain trees and streams the air gets very cold and makes a current that draws into itself the bird that strikes it. I had to learn the lesson of flying in those currents after being whirled up and down by them. But I do not hate them, since the first air current I encountered saved my life. Sitting on that ilex tree, I became so hungry that it drove me to fly home. Luckily, no soulless hawk obstructed my arrow-like flight. But my successful escape from that newly fledged murderer gave me back my courage, and as soon as you came home I said to myself, now that he, my friend, has seen me alive, he will not worry about me. I must fly anew through the falcon-infested air and test my courage. Now began my real odyssey. I went northwards to the eagle's nest, and stopped at the Lamasery, where a holy man had blessed me on an earlier occasion. There I revisited Mr. and Mrs. Swift, my old friends. Moving further north, I went past Singalele at last, and reached the eyrie of the eagles who had flown away. So I made myself comfortable there, but not too happy, for the eagles leave all kinds of refuse in their nests, and I am afraid they swarm with vermin. Though I spent my day in the eagle's nest, I decided to spend the night in a tree, free from horrid insects. After a couple of days, my going in and out of the eyrie gave me great prestige among other birds. They feared me, perhaps, because they took me for a sort of eagle. Even the hawks began to give me a wide berth. That gave me all the confidence that I needed. So early one morning, seeing a white wedge of birds coming south flying very high, I joined them. They did not mind my joining them. They were wild geese going towards Ceylon and beyond in the quest of a sunny ocean. Those geese, after 2 hours' flight, as the day became warmer, descended onto a rapid mountain stream. Unlike the eagles, they rarely looked downwards, but watched the horizon lines. They spied a little ribbon of whitish blue far off against the sky, and flew in a slowly declining straight line till it seemed as if the earth were rising to meet us, and soon all plunged into the silver stream, for now the waters looked more silvery than blue. They floated on the water, but as I knew that I was not web-footed, I sat on a tree and watched their antics. You know how flat and ugly the bills of geese are, but now I saw the reason for it. They used them like pincers on things such as shells that grew on the side of the banks. Every now and then a goose would put his bill on a plant or a shell, then wring it out of position as a butcher would wring a duck's neck. After that it would devour its victim wholesale, crushing it in its powerful throat, but ere it passed very far down its size, dwindled to nothing. I saw one fellow do worse than that. He found a fish, as lean as a water snake. In a hole under the bank he began to pull it. The more he pulled, the thinner and longer it got. Slowly, after a terrific tug of war, the poor fellow was dragged from his hole. Then the goose hopped up the shore and flung it on the ground. His bill had crushed the part it had held on to, nearly into pulp, so no wonder his wriggling victim was already dead. Then from nowhere walked up to him another goose. By the way, are not geese the most ungainly birds when they are not flying or swimming? On the water they resemble dreams floating on pools of sleep, but on land they hobble like cripples on crutches. By now the two geese were quarreling. They pulled one another's feathers, they slapped with their wings, they kicked each other with their feet every time they hopped up above the ground. While they were thus engaged, oblivious of their bone of contention, a cat-like creature, probably an otter, pounced from among the reeds, grabbed the dead eel, and vanished. Now the geese declared a truce, but too late. Oh, they have no more sense than, well, geese. Compared with them, we pigeons seem paragons of cleverness. After they had stopped fighting, the chief goose cried, "Cluck, caw, caw, caw!" That instant all of them paddled hard to gather momentum. A few extra wing beats, and they were in the air. How beautiful they looked now! That soft soughing of vast wings, their necks and bodies like drawings against the sky, making a severe eye-pleasing wedge. I shall never forget it. But every flock has its straggler. One fellow was left behind because he was still struggling with a fish. At last he secured it and flew up in quest of a tree where he could eat it under cover. Suddenly from the empty air an enormous hawk attacked him. The goose rose higher, but the indefatigable hawk did not relent. Up and up they circled, screaming and quacking. Suddenly a faint but clear echo of a honk was heard. The chief of the flock was calling the straggler. That distracted him. Hardly knowing what he was doing, he honked back an answer. That instant the fish fell from his mouth. It began to fall like a leaf. The hawk dipped, and just as he was going to pierce it with his talons, down the air came a surge and roar. In a trice, an eagle fell as a rock falls down a high precipice. That hawk ran for his life, and that gave me a great deal of pleasure to behold. Under the eagle's two wings like vast sails, the talons forked out lightning fashion and grabbed the fish. Then the monarch of the air in his shining armor of brown gold sailed away, the wind ruffling the feathers above his knees. Far away, the hawk was still running for his life. I am glad he went very far away, for I had to fly about in quest of a caravan road where I could get some seeds dropped by men. I soon found some, and after a tolerably decent meal I perched on a tree and went to sleep. When I woke, it was mid-afternoon. I decided to fly away up to reach the blessed Lamasery and visit my friends the swifts. My flight was unattended by any mishap, for I had learned to fly carefully by now. I generally went very far up and looked down, as well as at the horizon. Though I have not as long a neck as a wild goose, yet I turned and took side glances every few minutes in order to make sure that nothing was attacking my rear. I reached the monastery just in time, as the lamas were getting ready to stand on the edge of their chapel in order to pour benediction upon the world during sunset. Mr. and Mrs. Swift were flying near the nest where their 3 youngsters were put to bed. Of course they were glad to receive me. After their vesper services, the monks fed me, and the sweet old lama said something about a blessing that someone called Infinite Compassion had put upon me. Then I flew from his hand feeling absolutely fearless. In that state of mind and body, I entered my nest next to the swifts under the eaves of the lamasery. The nights in October are cold. In the morning, while the priests rang their bells, the little swifts flew about for exercise while their parents and I had to fly to shake off the chill of the morning. That day I spent there in order to help them make preparations for their journey south. I was surprised to learn that they intended to build a nest in Ceylon or Africa, whither they were going. I explained to them that a swift's nest is not at all an easy thing to construct. Then, in order to assuage my thirst for knowledge, they told me how they erect their homes. Chapter 8. Guy. Next Odyssey, continued. In order to make clear to you the swift's skill at architecture, let me beak fit for catching flying insects. His mouth is very wide to enable him to catch his prey while he is on the wing. Very few insects can escape his wide-open mouth as he comes down on them. As he is very small, Mr. Swift cannot lift much weight. No wonder his house is built out of slender materials such as straw and twigs of trees, no thicker than a middle-sized needle. The first time I saw a swift, he looked paralyzed and deformed. All swifts know that they have wretched legs. The bird has hardly any legs to balance upon. His small feet, made for sticking on to places like fishhooks, emerge right out of his body. His little hook-like claws seem inflexible. He has not enough leg between his body and his feet, and this deprives him of the springiness which longer legs supply to other birds. No wonder he cannot hop nor jump. But that defect is squared by his one advantage. He can cling to stone palisades, marble eaves, and alabaster friezes of houses as no other bird can. I have seen my friend Swift hang on to polished walls as if they were corrugated surfaces. Under these handicaps, all he can do is to choose holes in walls just under the eaves for his home. But there he cannot lay his eggs, for they would roll off. So he catches flying straws and small falling leaves, and glues them to the stone floor of his nest with his saliva. That is the secret of his skill at architecture. His saliva is wonderful. It dries and hardens like the best glue of the cabinet makers. When the nest is made ready, the long white eggs are laid. Among the swifts, women are not so emancipated as amongst the pigeons. Our women enjoy equal rights with men, but the female swift has always the larger part of the work to do. For instance, Mr. Swift never sits on the eggs. He lets his wife do it. Occasionally he brings her food during the day, but otherwise he spends all his waking hours visiting male swifts whose wives are similarly occupied. I told my friend Swift he ought to copy the pigeons and give more freedom to his wife, but he seemed to think this a pet joke of mine. At last our preparations were made, and one fine autumn morning the 5 swifts and I set out in a southerly direction, piloted by Mr. Swift. We never went in a straight line, but zigzagged east or west, though we held to a general southern course. The swifts eat flies and gnats that float on rivers and lakes. They go about 50 miles an hour, a blinding speed for a small bird, and do not like woods because while their gaze is fixed downwards in search of insects, they may break their wings on a tree. They prefer open, clear spaces above the waters, and with their scythe-like long wings they cleave the air as swiftly as an eagle falls on its prey. Think of the precision of the swift's eye and mouth. While he is whirling over the water, he snaps up flying insects with such ease that the space he traverses is danced in the sunlight. Thus we went over streams, ponds, and lagoons. By the way, Mr. Swift eats his food in a hurry and takes his drink the same way. He flies over the water, skimming up drops as he goes and swallowing them at a very high rate of speed. No wonder that he hates to fly in a place crowded with boughs, larches, and saplings. But so much flight in open air has its drawbacks. While a swift is eating insects with such speed, a sparrowhawk may fall on him from above. Under these circumstances, the swift cannot dip down, for that would mean death by drowning. I must tell you of one such attack on my friends. They were busy catching their dinner on a vast lake one afternoon, and while I was flying about keeping an eye on the younger swifts, down came a sparrowhawk. I, who had undertaken to look after the children, had to act quickly, even at the risk of my own life. Without an instant's hesitation, I plunged and tumbled, inserting my body between the enemy and the young ones. Well, the sparrowhawk had never expected so much nerve from a member of the dove family, nor did he calculate my weight. I was at least 5 ounces heavier than he. He struck my tail with his talons, tore a few feathers, and thinking that he had got something, he circled the air for a moment or two. Before he realized that he had only my feathers, all the swifts were safe, clinging to the bark of a tree out of anybody's reach. But the small sparrowhawk was so infuriated that he fell on me with the fury of a large one. However, his body was very small and his talons smaller, and I knew they could not pierce my feathers and my skin very far, so I accepted his challenge and tumbled up. He followed. I shot downwards, he too dived after. Then I began to rise high. He pursued as before, but those little hawks fear the upper air, and his wings lagged now. To my 2 wing beats he could make but 1. Seeing him hopeless and tired, I planned to teach him the lesson of his life. No sooner had I conceived than I executed my plan. I shot downwards. He plunged after. Down, down, down. The water of the lake rose towards us, higher and higher every second, till it looked no farther than the width of my wing. Then I flung forward a few inches and struck a warm air current which helped me upwards. As you know, air warmed in the hollow places and valleys of mountain country has a tendency to shoot up into cooler regions. We birds look for these currents to help us when we have need to make a sudden upward flight. Now I tumbled 3 times, and when I looked down I found that sparrowhawk drowning in the water. He had not been able to reach the air current. After a considerable ducking, he laboriously flew ashore, and there under thick leaves hid his disgrace. That instant the swifts came out of their hiding place and flew southwards. The next day we met some wild ducks. They had colored throats like mine, but otherwise they were white as snow. They were stream ducks, whose habit is to float down a mountain brook after fish. When they have gone far, they rise out of the water and fly back to their starting place, so they spend the day like shuttles going back and forth. Their bills were flatter than those of the geese, and they are dented inside, for once they close on a fish the bills never slip. They did not seem to care much for the shellfish, but that was probably because the fish in the lake were so plentiful. The swifts did not like the place because the ducks' wings beat the air continually and blew away the insects that normally fly over any water surface. Still, they were glad to see ducks that loved and lived on mountain torrents, never bothering about the calm waters so dear to most ducks. It was these ducks who warned us against the owls and other murderers of the night which infested those regions. So we did our best to hide in places too small for owls to go into. It was easy to find holes in a tree small enough for the swifts, but I decided to stay in the open and take my chances. Night came on apace. Pretty soon my eyes could serve me no longer. Darkness within darkness, like layers of black cloth, lay upon them. I commended myself to the gods of my race and tried to sleep. But who could sleep with those owls hooing about? Terror seized me for the night. Not an hour passed without some birds shrieking in pain. The owls, too, hooted in triumph. Now a starling, then a bulbul, the Indian nightingale would cry mortally and die under the owl's grip. Though my eyes were shut, my ears knew the carnage that went on. A crow shrieked, then another, then another. Almost a flock flew up in terror and smashed themselves against trees. But better that kind of death than to be killed by the searing and tearing beaks and claws of the owls. Soon, to my utter confusion, I smelt weasels in the air, and then I felt that death was at hand. That made me desperate. I opened my eyes to see. A pale white light was shining on all things. There before me, about 6 feet away, was a weasel. I flew up, though that increased the danger of my being killed by the owls, and sure enough, along came one hooting and screaming. 2 more owls followed. I heard their wing beats, and by the nature of the sounds I knew that we were flying over the water, for it echoed back even the slightest shiver of our feathers. I could not fly in any direction very far, since I saw not more than 6 feet at a time. So I waited in the air, groping for an air current that sucked the air of the river up above the boughs that hung over it. Alas, those owls were on me already, but I tumbled, then swung into a circle. The owls would not give up the chase. I rose further up. Now the moonlight like water dripped from my wings. I could see a little more clearly, and that brought me back my courage. But my enemies did not relent. They too rose, and more light fell on their eyes, blinding them, though not completely. Suddenly 2 of them plunged towards me. Up I flew. The owls missed. Lo! They had fallen on each other, their claws locked together, their wings flapping helplessly in the air. They screamed like fiends and fell among the reeds of the riverbank. Now I looked about carefully and noticed to my surprise that I had flown towards the dawning of day and not at the moon. My terror-stricken eyes had not seen truly. But there were no more owls about. They had begun to seek for places of hiding from the growing sunlight. Although I felt safe, I kept away from the prodigious shadows of the tall trees, for even now an owl might lurk there. I stayed on a slender branch on a tree-top, which caught the first flight of the sun's arrows, transfiguring it into an umbrella of dancing gold. Slowly the light spread further down, till the white torrent below trembled with colors like a weasel's eyes. Just then, on the river bank, I saw an appalling sight. 2 large crows, blacker than coal, were jabbing and prodding with their beaks a helpless blinking owl caught in the reeds. Now that the sun shone, it could not open its eyes. Of course the night's slaughter done amongst the crows was large, and it was the crows' turn to avenge their wrongs, but I could not bear the sight of 2 of them killing that trapped owl. So I flew away from the murderers and went to seek my friends the swifts. I recounted some of my experiences, and the parents told me that they had heard terrible cries of distress which kept them from slumber. Mr. Swift asked if everything was safe outside, and I thought it was. When we came out, I found that poor owl lying dead among the reeds. Strange to say, that morning we saw no ducks on the stream. Apparently they had flown very early in the morning in a southerly direction, and we decided to do the same. We planned not to seek the company of other birds going our way, for during the season of migration, wherever flocks of pigeons, grouse, and other birds go, their enemies such as owls, hawks, and eagles go after them. In order to avoid danger and such shocking sights as we had seen before, we flew to the east, and after going eastwards a whole day, we rested in the village of Sikkim. The next day we flew south for half a day and again eastward. That sort of roundabout journey took a long time, but it saved us no end of trouble. Once we were overtaken by a storm and were blown into a lake country, and there I saw an amazing sight. I was on a treetop when below me I discerned a lot of domesticated ducks floating on the water with a fish in each one's mouth, but none of them swallowed his morsel. I had never seen ducks resist the temptation to eat fish before, so I called the swifts to behold the sight. They clung to the barks of several trees and looked at the ducks, but they could hardly believe their eyes. What was the matter with them? Pretty soon a boat hove in sight, pulled by two men, flat-faced and yellow. On seeing them, the ducks paddled to the boat as fast as they could go. Reaching it, they hopped up, and then, can you believe it? They dropped their capture into a large fish basket and jumped down into the lake to fish for some more, and that went on for at least 2 hours. Apparently those Tibeto-Burman fishermen never cast nets. They tied a string tightly, almost to the choking point, around their ducks' necks, and then brought them to the lake to catch fish. Whatever the latter caught, they brought to their human masters. However, when their basket became full, they undid the strings that were around the ducks' necks, who then plunged into the lake and gorged themselves on fish. Now we flew away far from the lakes for a while in quest of harvest fields. There the swifts fell on the insects that flew about newly mown grain and devoured them. I, too, ate to repletion of the grain, though not of the insects. While sitting on the fence of a rice field, I heard someone hitting something. It sounded very much like a chaffinch cracking open a cherry stone with his beak in order to get at its kernel. Isn't it strange that a little bird's beak has the power of a nutcracker? But when I wandered nearer the place, under the fence whence the noise was coming, I found another bird, a Himalayan thrush. He was engaged not in cracking cherry stones, but in hitting a slowly moving snail with his beak. Tick, tack, tick, tack, tack! He hammered on and on until the snail was stunned into stillness. The thrush raised his head and looked around, poised himself on tiptoe, opened his wings, took a quick aim, and struck 3 more blows. Tack, tack, tack. The shell broke open, revealing a delicious snail. He lifted it up with his beak, which was bleeding slightly. Apparently he had opened his mouth too wide and hurt its corners. After balancing the snail correctly in his grasp, he flew up and vanished into a tree where his mate was waiting for supper. The rest of our journey through the grain fields of Sikkim was uneventful. The only thing that is worth remembering was the trapping of peacocks by men in the forests. These birds come to the hot southern marshes in quest of food and warmth when the snakes and other creatures whom they eat go into winter quarters in the north. Peacocks and tigers admire one another. The former like to look at the tiger's skin, and he enjoys the beauty of their plumes. Sometimes at the waterhole a tiger will stand gazing at the plumes of a peacock on a bough, and the peacock will crane his neck to feast his eyes on the beauty of the striped skin. Now comes man, the eternal aggressor, on the scene. For instance, a man one day brought a piece of cloth painted exactly like a tiger's skin, so that no bird could tell by looking at it that it was not the striped one himself. Then he set a noose on a branch of a tree nearby and slunk away. I could tell by the odor of the painted cloth that it was not a tiger, but peacocks have no sense of smell worth speaking of. They are victims of their own eyes. So in a few hours a pair of peacocks came and began to gaze at the make-believe tiger from a treetop, coming lower and lower. They deceived themselves into the belief that the tiger was asleep. Emboldened by that illusion, they came very close and stood on the branch near the trap. It did not take them long to walk into it, but how they both stepped into a single trap I cannot make out. No sooner were they caught than they shrieked in despair. Then appeared the trapper and played another trick on them. He threw up 2 large black canvas caps and lassoed them on each peacock's head, hiding the poor bird's eyes. Once the eyes are darkened, a bird never resists much. The man now tied their feet so that they could not walk. Then he set one on each end of his bamboo pole. Slowly he lifted it by the middle, put it on his shoulder and walked off, the long tails of the peacocks streaming down like cataracts of rainbow before and behind him. There ends my odyssey. The next day I said goodbye to the swifts. They went further south, and I was glad to get home, a wiser and a sadder bird.
"Now," demanded Gay Neck, "tell me this.
Why is there so much killing and inflicting of pain by birds and beasts on one another? I don't think all of you men hurt each other, do you? But birds and beasts do. All that makes me so sad. Chapter 9. The Wisdom of the Lama. After about the 10th day of strict and most sincere meditation in the manner he had prescribed, the Lama sent for Gay Neck and myself. So, with the pigeon between my hands, I climbed up to his cell. The Lama's face, generally yellow, today looked brown and very powerful. A strange poise and power shone in his almond-shaped eyes. He took Gay Neck in his hands and said, "May the north wind bring healing unto you. May the south wind bring healing unto you. May the winds of east and west pour healing into you. Fear flees from you, hate flees from you, and suspicion flees from you. Courage like a rushing tide gallops through you. Peace possesses your entire being, and serenity and strength have become your two wings. In your eyes shines courage. Power and prowess dwell in your heart. You are healed, you are healed, you are healed. Peace, peace, peace." We sat there meditating on those thoughts till the sun set, smiting the Himalayan peaks into multicolored flames. The valleys, the hollows, and the woods about us put on a mantle of purple glory. Slowly Gay Neck hopped down from the Lama's hands, walked out to the entrance of the cell, and looked at the sunset. He opened his left wing and waited. Then softly and ever so slowly he opened his right wing, feather by feather, muscle by muscle, until at last it spread out like a sail. Instead of doing anything theatrical, such as instantly flying off, he carefully shut his two wings as if they were two precious but fragile fans. He too knew how to salute the sunset. With the dignity of a priest he walked downstairs, but hardly had he gone out of sight than I fancied I heard, the flapping of his wings. I was about to get up hastily and see what had really happened, but the holy man put his hand on my shoulder and restrained me while an inscrutable smile played on his lips. The next morning I told Gond what had happened. He replied tartly, "Gay Neck opened his wings to salute the setting sun, you say? There is nothing surprising in that. Animals are religious, though man in his ignorance thinks they are not. I have seen monkeys, eagles, pigeons, leopards, and even mongoose adore the dawn and sunset. Can you show them to me?" Gond answered, "Yes, but not now. Let us go and give Gay Neck his breakfast." When we reached his cage, we found its door open, and no pigeon within. I was not surprised, for I had left the cage unlocked every night that we had been at the Lamasserie. But where had he gone? We could not find him in the main building, so we went to the library. There, in a deserted outer cell, we found some of his feathers, and nearby Gond detected a weasel's footsteps. That made us suspect trouble. But if the weasel had attacked and killed him, there would be blood on the floor. Then, whither had he fled? What had he done? Where was he now? We wandered for an hour. Just as we had decided to give up the search, we heard him cooing, and there he was on the roof of the library, talking to his old friends the swifts, who were clinging to their nest under the eaves. We could make out their answer to his cooing. Mr. Swift said, "Cheep, cheep, cheep," I cried to Gay Neck in joy, and I gave him his call to breakfast. Aye. He curved his neck and listened. Then, as I called again, he saw me and instantly flapped his wings loudly, then flew down and sat on my wrist, cool as a cucumber. During the earliest dawn, he must have heard the priest's footsteps going up to their morning meditation, and gotten out of his cage, then gone astray to the outer cell, where no doubt a young and inexpert weasel had attacked him. A veteran like Gayneck could easily outwit the weasel by presenting him with a few feathers only. While the young hopeful was looking for the pigeon inside a lot of torn feathers, his would-be victim flew up into the sky. There he found his old friend Swift flying to salute the rising sun, and after they had performed their morning worship together, they had come down for a friendly chat on the roof of the monastery library. That day very terrible news reached the Lamasery. A wild buffalo had attacked the village that the Lama had spoken of the day before. He had come there during the previous evening and killed 2 people who were going home from a meeting of the village elders that was held around the communal threshing floor. The villagers had sent up a deputation to the abbot to say a prayer for the destruction of the beast and begging him to exorcise the soul out of the brute. The holy man said that he would use means that would kill the murderous buffalo in 24 hours. Go home in peace, O beloved ones of infinite compassion. Your prayers will be answered. Do not venture out of doors after nightfall. Stay home and meditate on peace and courage. Gond, who was present, asked, "How long has this fellow been pestering your village?" The entire deputation affirmed that he had been coming every night for a week. He had eaten up almost half of their spring crop, again begging for strong and effective incantation and exorcism to kill the buffalo. They went down to their village. After the deputation had left, the Lama said to Gond, who was standing by, "O chosen one of victory, now that you are healed, go forth to slay the murderer." "But, my lord—" "Fear no more, Gond. Your meditations have healed you. Now test in the woods what you have acquired here by this means. In solitude men gain power and poise which they must test in the multitude. Ere the sun sets twice from now, you shall return victorious. As an earnest of my perfect faith in your success, I request you to take this boy and his pigeon with you. Surely I would not ask you to take a boy of 16 with you if I doubted your powers or the outcome of your mission. Go, bring the murderer to justice." That afternoon we set out for the jungle. I was overjoyed at the prospect of spending at least one night in there again. What a pleasure it was to go with Gond and the pigeon, both whole and well once more, in quest of a wild buffalo. Is there any boy on earth who would not welcome such an opportunity? So, thoroughly equipped with rope ladders, a lasso and knives, with Gayneck on my shoulder, we set out. The British government forbids the use of firearms to the common people of India, and so we carried no rifles. About 3 in the afternoon we reached the village northwest of the Lamasery. There we took up the trail of the buffalo. We followed it through dense woods and wide clearings. Here and there we crossed a brook or had to climb over mammoth fallen trees. It was extraordinary how clear the buffalo's footprints were, and how heavy, Gond remarked. He must have been frightened to death, for look how heavily he has trodden here. Animals in their normal, unafraid state leave very little trace behind, but when frightened, they act as if the terror of being killed weighed their bodies down. This fellow's hoofs have made prodigious and clear marks wherever he went. How frightened he must have been. At last we reached an impassable river. Its current, according to Gond, was sharp enough to break our legs had we stepped into it. Strangely enough, the buffalo too had not dared to cross it. So we followed his precedent, looking for more hoof prints on the bank. In 20 more minutes we found that they swerved off the stream bank and disappeared into a thick jungle which looked black as a pit, although it was hardly 5 in the afternoon. This place could not have been more than half an hour's run from the village for a wild buffalo of any age. Gond said, "Do you hear the song of the water?" After listening for several minutes, I heard the sound of water kissing the sedges and other grass not far off with gurgling, groaning sounds. We were about 20 feet from a lake into which the river ran. The murderous buffalo is hiding, probably asleep somewhere between here and the lagoon, cried Gond. Let us make our home on one of the twin trees yonder. It is getting dark, and I am sure he will be here soon. We should not be found on the floor of the jungle when he turns up. There is hardly a space of 4 feet between the trees." His last words struck me as curious, so I examined the space between the trees. They were tall and massive, and between them lay a piece of earth just broad enough to afford room for both of us walking abreast of each other. Now I shall lay down my fear-soaked tunic halfway between these twins. Then Gond proceeded to take from under his tunic a bundle of old clothes which he had been wearing until today. He placed them on the ground, then climbed one of the trees. After Gond had gone up, he swung down a rope ladder for me. I climbed up on it with Gaynek fluttering and beating his wings on my shoulders in order to keep his balance. Both of us safely reached the branch on which Gond was sitting, and, since the evening was coming on apace, we sat still for a while. The first thing I noticed as the dusk fell was bird life. Herons, hornbills, grouse, pheasant, song sparrows, and emerald flocks of parrots seemed to infest the forest. The drone of the bee, the cut-cut-cut of the woodpecker, and the shrill cry of the eagle far overhead blended with the tearing crying noises of the mountain torrent and the staccato laughter of the already waking hyenas. The tree on which we made our home for the night was very tall. We went further up in order to make sure that no leopard or serpent was above us. After a close inspection, we chose a couple of branches between which we hung our rope ladder in the shape of a strong hammock. Just as we had made ourselves secure on our perch, Gond pointed to the sky. I looked up at once. There floated on wings of ruby a very large eagle. Though darkness was rising like a flood from the floor of the jungle, in the spaces above the sky burnt like a pigeon's throat, and through it circled again and again that solitary eagle who was no doubt, according to Gond, performing his worship of the setting sun. His presence had already had a stilling effect on the birds and insects of the forest. Though he was far above them, yet like a congregation of mute worshippers, they kept silent while he, their king, flew backward and forward and vaulted before their god, the Father of Light, with the ecstasy of a hierophant. Slowly the ruby fire ebbed from his wings. Now they became purple sails fringed with sparks of gold. As if his adoration was at last concluded, he rose higher, and as an act of self-immolation before his deity, flew towards the flaming peaks burning with fire, and vanished in their splendor like a moth. Below, a buffalo's bellowing unlocked the insect voices one by one, tearing into shreds and tatters the stillness of the evening. An owl hooted nearby, making Gaynek snuggle closely to my heart under my tunic. Suddenly the Himalayan dhole, a night bird, very much like a nightingale, flung abroad its magic song. Like a silver flute blown by a god, trill upon trill, cadenza upon cadenza, spilled its torrential peace, which rushed like rain down the boughs of the trees, dripping over their rude barks to the floor of the jungle, then through their very roots into the heart of the earth. The enchantment of an early summer night in the Himalayas will remain forever indescribable. In fact, it was so sweet and lonely that I felt very sleepy. Gond put an extra rope around me that held me secure to the trunk of the tree. Then I put my head on his shoulder in order to sleep comfortably. But before I did so, he told me of his plan. Those cast-off garments of mine are what I wore while my heart was possessed of fear. They have a strange odor. If that brother-in-law idiot of a buffalo gets their scent, he will come hither. He who is frightened responds to the odor of fear. If he comes to investigate my cast-off dress, we shall do what we can to him. I hope we can lasso and take him home tame as a heifer. I did not hear the rest of his words, for I had fallen asleep. I do not know how long I slept, but suddenly I was roused by a terrific bellowing. When I opened my eyes, Gond, who was already awake, undid the rope around me and pointed below. In the faint light of the dawn-at of an angry beast. In the tropics the day breaks rapidly. I looked down most intently. Now in the growing light of day I saw. There could be no two opinions about what I saw. Yes, there was a hillock of shining jet rubbing its dark side against the tree on which we sat. It was about 10 feet long, I surmised, though half of its bulk was covered by the leaves and boughs of the trees. The beast looked like a black opal coming out of a green furnace. Such was the glitter of the newly grown foliage under the morning sun. I thought, the buffalo that in nature looks healthy and silken, in a zoo is a mangy creature with matted mane and dirty skin. Can those who see bisons in captivity ever conceive how beautiful they can be? What a pity that most young people, instead of seeing one animal in nature, which is worth 100 in any zoo, must derive their knowledge of God's creatures from their appearance in prisons. If we cannot perceive any right proportion of man's moral nature by looking at prisoners in a jail, how do we manage to think that we know all about an animal by gazing at him penned in a cage? However, to return to that murderous buffalo at the foot of our tree. Gay Neck was freed from under my tunic and left to roam on the tree, which Gond and I descended by a number of branches like the rungs of a ladder, till we reached a branch that was about 2 feet above the buffalo. He did not see us. Gond swiftly tied around the tree trunk one end of the long lasso. I noticed that the buffalo was playing underneath by putting his horns now and then through a tattered garment, what was left of Gond's clothes. No doubt the odor of man in them had attracted him. Though his horns were clean, there were marks of fresh blood on his head. Apparently he had gone to the village and killed another person during the night. That roused Gond. He whispered into my ear, "We shall get him alive. You slip this lasso over his horns from above." In a trice, Gond had leaped off the branch near the rear of the buffalo. That startled the beast. But he could not turn round, for close to his right was a tree which I mentioned before, and to his left was the tree on which I stood. He had to go back or forward between the twins in order to get out from them, but before this happened I had flung the lasso over his head. The touch of the rope acted like electricity upon him. He hastened backwards in order to slip off the lasso, so fast that Gond, had he not already gone around the next tree, would have been trampled and cut to death by the sharp hoofs of the beast. But now, to my utter consternation, I noticed that instead of gripping his 2 horns at the very root, I had succeeded in lassoing only one of them. That instant I shrieked to Gond in terror, "Beware! Only one of his horns is caught. The rope may slip off that one any time. Run up a tree." But that intrepid hunter ignored my advice. Instead, he stood facing the enemy a short distance away from him. Then I saw the brute lower his head and plunge forward. I shut my eyes in terror. When I opened them again, I saw that the bull was tugging at the rope that held him by the horn and kept him from butting into the tree behind which Gond stood. His monstrous bellowing filled the jungle with a fearful racket. Echoes of it coursed one after another like frightened, shrieking children. Since the bull had not yet succeeded in reaching him, Gond drew his razor-sharp dagger, about 1.5 feet long and 2 inches broad. He slowly slipped behind another tree to the right, then vanished out of sight. The bull just ran straight at the spot where he had seen Gond last. Fortunately, the rope was still clinging tightly to his horn. Here Gond changed his tactics. He ran away in the opposite direction, zigzagging in between different trees. This he did to go where his odor could not reach the bull blown down to him by the wind. But though he was bewildered, yet the bull turned and followed. He again saw the bundle of Gond's clothes on the ground under our tree. That maddened him. He sniffed, and then worried it with his horns. By now Gond was downwind. Though I could not see him, I surmised that he could tell by the odor where the bull was, in case the trees hid him from view. The beast bellowed again as he put his horns through Gond's clothes, which raised a terrific tumult in the trees all around. From nowhere came flocks of monkeys running from branch to branch. Squirrels ran like rats from trees to the jungle floor, then back again. Swarms of birds such as jays, herons, and parrots were flying about and shrieking in unison with crows, owls, and kites. Suddenly the bull charged again. I saw that Gond was standing there calmly facing him. If ever I saw a man calm as calmness itself, it was Gond. The bull's hind legs throbbed and swept on like swords. Then something happened. He reared in the air. No doubt it was the pull of the lasso rope of which one end was tied to our tree. He rose several feet above the ground, then fell. That instant, like a dry twig snapped by a child, his horn cracked and flew up in the air. The breaking created an irresistible momentum that flung him sideways on the ground. He almost rolled over, his legs kicking the air violently. Instantly Gond leaped forward like a spark from the flint. Seeing him, the buffalo balanced himself and sat on his haunches, snorting. He almost succeeded in rising to his feet, but Gond struck near his shoulder with the dagger. Its deadly edge dug deep, and Gond pressed on it with his entire weight. A bellow like a volcanic eruption shook the jungle, and with it a fountain of liquid ruby spurted up. Unable to bear the sight any longer, I again shut my eyes. In a few minutes, when I came down from my perch, I found that the buffalo had died of a hemorrhage. It lay in a deep pool of blood, and nearby sat Gond on the ground, wiping himself from the stain of his encounter. I knew that he wished to be left alone, so I went to the old tree and called to Gaynek. He made no response. I went all the way up to the topmost branch of the tree, but in vain. He was not there. When I came down, Gond had cleansed himself. He pointed at the sky. We beheld nature's scavengers. Kites below, and far above them vultures flew. They had already learnt that someone had died, and they must clean up the jungle. Gond said, "We will find the pigeon in the monastery." He flew with the rest of the birds, doubtless. Let us depart hence soon. But before starting homeward, I went to measure the dead buffalo, to whom flies had been swarming from every direction. He was 10 feet and a half in length, and his forelegs measured over 3 feet. Our trudge back towards the monastery was made in silence, which was only broken when about noonday we had reached the stricken village and informed its headman that their enemy was dead. He was relieved to hear of it, though he was very sad because during the previous evening the buffalo had killed his aged mother, who was going to the village temple to her worship before sunset. We were very hungry and walked fast, and soon we reached the monastery. At once I made inquiries about my pigeon. Gaynek was not there. It was terrible. But the old holy man said as we chatted in his cell, "He is safe, as are you, Gond." After a pause of several minutes he asked, "What is troubling your peace of mind?" The old hunter thought out quietly what he was going to say. "Nothing, my lord, save this. I hate to kill anything. I wanted to catch that bull alive, and alas, I had to destroy him. When that horn of his broke, and there was nothing between him and me, I had to put my knife through a vital vein. I am so sorry I could not get him alive in order to sell him to a zoo." "Oh, you soul of commercialism," I exclaimed. "I am not sorry that the bull died. Better death than to be caged for the rest of his life in a zoo. Real death is preferable to living death." "If you had only slipped the lasso over both horns," Gond retorted. The Holy One ejaculated, "Both of you should be concerned about Gaynek, not about what is already dead." Gond said, "True. Let us search for him on the morrow." But the Holy One replied, "No, return to Denton, my son. Your family is anxious about you. I hear their thoughts." The next day we left for Denton on a pair of ponies. By forced march and changing ponies twice a day at different posts, we reached Denton in 3 days' time. As we were going up towards our house, we encountered a very excited servant of my family. He said that Gaynek had returned 3 days ago. But since we had not come back with him, my parents had begun to worry, and they had sent out parties searching after us, alive or dead. He and I almost ran up to the house. In another 10 minutes my mother's arms were around me, and Gaynek, with his feet on my head, was fluttering his wings in order to balance himself. I cannot begin to describe how overjoyed I was to hear that Gaynek had flown at last. He had winged all the way from the Lamasery to our home in Denton. He had not faltered nor failed. "Oh, thou soul of flight, thou pearl amongst pigeons," I exclaimed to myself as Gond and I accelerated our steps. Thus ended our pilgrimage to Singalele. It healed both Gaynek and Gond of the disease of fear and hate that they had caught in the battlefields. No labor would be in vain if it could heal a single soul of these worst ills of life. Instead of spinning out a sermon at the end of this story, let me say this: whatever we think and feel will color what we say or do. He who fears, even unconsciously, or has his least little dream tainted with hate, will inevitably, sooner or later, translate these two qualities into his action. Therefore, my brothers, live courage, breathe courage, and give courage. Think and feel love so that you will be able to pour out of yourselves peace and serenity as naturally as a flower gives forth fragrance.